Magic gates, apparently caused by some magical phenomenon at one moment, appeared all over the world. Even in high-altitude mountains, shrouded in a ton of snow, similar magical objects appeared among travelers who organized an expedition. They were in all corners of the world, not excluding hot countries where carefree children could play ball next to this phenomenon because it turned out that the gate is harmless to the human body. They could have been in the very center of the city, at rush hour, when people were frantically rushing about their business, but even so their exact purpose was not revealed. The news was always talking about the appearance of this gate, and as the cases became more frequent, more and more people began to worrying about it. Through experiments, scientists are still trying to figure out the cause of this phenomenon, as well as the possibility that the gate is associated with the recent appearance and disappearance of living monstroid creatures. Here the gate, located at the high-rise building, did not interfere at all with the workers who managed to load everything. Colleagues stood next to each other while the boss threw a bottle of water for Eugene because he realized that the box was heavy, while the woman praised the guy for his efforts, calling his arms strong. The guy grinned sheepishly, opening a bottle of water. Colleagues looked at the young man and began to wonder why he took this difficult job, supposedly paying for his studies at the university. The guy replied that he was working to pay for his younger brother's university education. The woman asked whether he was paying for it. He shows a photo of himself and his younger brother together on his phone, saying that he does not consider this torment. The woman takes the phone in her hand. At this time the guy points to his younger brother, while the colleague notes the attractiveness and neatness of the guy. Eugene agrees with her words. The woman holds the phone in her hand and awkwardly looks at the young man who stands opposite her and talks in detail about his younger brother. The guy takes the phone and shows it to his surprised colleagues standing opposite them, while the woman is perplexed by his detailed story about their life, to which the boss says with a smile that this always happens when it comes to his younger brother. Eugene smiles and happily announces that his brother's classes also end early today. Yu-Hyen's hands were clasped on his briefcase, while Yu-Hyen happily told his colleagues that he would run to him immediately after work to eat meat. Yu-Hyen was sitting on a train full of people. His gaze was fixed on the window. The same gate could be seen in the distance, while his older brother admitted that the work was becoming more and more, although he saw the advantages in it. The blue body of the truck, where the boxes were located, drove calmly along the road, while Eugene noted that now is not the moving season, although there is no other season. The young man clarifies, while the man points out the window, talking about how more and more people are feeling discomfort because of this thing, which is why they are moving. Another orange gate hung above the street, not far from a high-rise building. The man notes that it would be nice to know the purpose of the gate, because he had vague doubts. The orange gate suddenly sparkled. Eugene didn't even have time to express his doubts about the fact that the gate was blue before. The guy screams and gets pretty scared. All three sat in shock at what had happened. The boss was wondering what it was. The woman looked around in fear, asked if someone had crashed. The guy was in a hurry, getting ready to go out to check the integrity of the things in the boxes. Eugene opens the truck door, looking towards the back of the truck. In front of him, on the back of the truck, sat a huge monster, drooling, looking at the guy. The young man opened his eyes wide, speechless with horror. The monster notices the guy and grins, clearly intending to attack him. It sharply attacks the guy, who jumped back, screaming in horror. The monster suddenly rushes towards Eugene and crashes his head into the truck because the guy managed to dodge by bending over and covering his head with his hands. The monster overturned the truck while the young man, sitting on the asphalt, screamed in fear, wondering what kind of creature it was. His colleagues were still inside, screaming in horror. Eugene's face is filled with fear. He assumes that it is a monster. Not realizing what it really is, his frightened gaze rushes to the right. Monsters appeared in a heap from the gate and flew at the frightened townspeople who were running away from them. The gates are still sparkling while these monsters appear from them, and as it turned out, they were connected to the dungeon, otherwise, to another world, from where these creatures entered the world of people. Monsters attacked people, mercilessly grabbing them, but as it turned out, the uncleared and abandoned dungeon burst, reaching overflow. Eugene grabbed a strong stick and ran towards the monster, screaming. Swinging at this beast from behind, the guy wanted this lizard to get out of the truck right away. His face became frightened. He was ready to fight this monster. However, someone else's strong hands managed to stop this creature by forcefully opening its mouth wide. The guy's boss struggled to get out of the truck, still opening his mouth to the monster, while her husband was shocked by what was happening. Her hands took on an unusual purple color while she restrained the beast and told the man to get out while there was still a moment, but he, in turn, did not understand what had happened to her. Drops of sweat were running down the woman's face. She shouted to her husband that she herself did not understand everything that had happened. In fact, it turned out that there were people who awakened their abilities when encountering monsters. There was an accident and fire on one of the roads. The awakened became hunters, who had to clear the dungeons. Hunters soon became the most sought-after profession in the world. The demonic beast was burning dead. Those around were horrified after the attack. They looked at the burning monster and at Eugene standing in front of the monster as his hands emitted a black and purple aura. He looked at the monster. His shirt was ruined from the battle with the monster. His tie and hair were blowing in the wind. He looked at his hands in surprise. Not believing his eyes, he became an S-class hunter, of which there were only a few. 8 years later, the Republic of Korea. Sole cloudless weather reigned over the city. The girl's hand caused an unusual phenomenon of green light. She asked if people could see it. The reporter, standing in front of the girl in a light green sweater, answered in the negative because she saw nothing. She replied that this was a status window that only she could see. A pretty girl with brown eyes and brown hair, wearing a cute sweater, who was looking at the magical phenomenon, replied that at first she thought that she was in a game. The glowing sprout logo, surrounded by a circle, had an inscription beneath it calling on nature to become greener. It was a skill that grew trees in a specific area. Yumi explained that this status window contains a list of skills that she can use. For example, a girl falls to her knees with a roar, touching the tiles with her hands, from which tree vines instantly grew, reaching upward, surprising the journalists present there. Soon the vines intertwined with each other, right up to the ceiling. Inscriptions appeared in the frame with the names of the program and a similar phenomenon. People were delighted with this ability, asking if people were saved with the help of this power. Yumi lived among garbage in a terrible room, overgrown with mold and moss, 8 years ago while looking for work during a dungeon strike. Then she was able to grow wooden vines and save people by awakening her skill, and recently she saved people from a falling building in a similar way. The girl absent-mindedly put her hand behind her neck, talking about how she was in a hurry and didn't notice it herself. A small guild posed near the cleared portal. It was then that Yumi chose the profession of a hunter. A middle-aged woman with short hair, pulled back into a ponytail, stood with her back in front of shelves with unusual contents, pointing at them with her left thumb. She talked about how the items obtained in the dungeon cost a lot of money. The magical crystals glowing with a purple light, floating above a group of hunters, were called magic stones, and only hunters with good skills could get them. Thanks to this thing, they could sit on a whole lot of money because they were worth from several hundred to several billion. Eugene especially stands out, looking to the side with a thoughtful expression on his face. He is quite famous. He was still a high school student at the time of his awakening. The small guild emerged from the gates and was greeted by the paparazzi. Eugene, who lost his parents at an early age and lived in poverty, founded a guild, which everyone calls the Abyss, after his awakening. Behind the guy stood a rather strong man, and another guy was walking not so far behind them. Eugene is already 25 years old, and many cannot even imagine its condition. The reporter holds out the microphone to Yumi, who was at a loss. She was asked about her condition, to which the girl replied that this was impossible because she was E-class. However, clenching her hand into a fist and closing her eyes, she answered enthusiastically that if she continued to work, she would be able to save money for her younger sister's education. Then the screen darkens and an inscription appears on half the screen about the death of the huntress. This was her last interview because she died while clearing the dungeon. A whole group of rescuers carried Yumi's body while others tried to help the rest of the hunters. In the morning, the girl's body was taken to the hospital, but she was unable to recover. A huge crowd of people gathered in front of the portal and stood behind the fence while preparations were made. The gates sparkled, shimmering blue. The hunters were gathering for the next cleanup, preparing their weapons. At this time, one guy in a red uniform called out to his superior, who was nearby in a blue uniform and getting ready, asking about a Class F person. Eugene was sitting on a chair, bending over, wearing a black cap, mask, and fingerless gloves. His crutches lay nearby, while the others scurried around. He is a Class F hunter nicknamed Educator. Eugene darkened, looking at the guy who called him a magnet for trouble, because many times it happened that all the members of the squad died while he miraculously remained alive. In general, a bad sign. Eugene clasped his fingers together as he listened to how things were so bad that his younger brother abandoned him. The guy in red took out his phone, Starting to read the article while the blonde hunter was behind him, he began to read an article about how Eugene did not visit Yuyun in the hospital when his leg was crushed into powder, and the blonde asked him to stop discussing the younger one. Suddenly, Eugene's hand grabs the guy's t-shirt as he continues to read the article, calling his little brother disgusting. He pulls the guy towards him, threateningly telling him to shut up. The young man looked furiously at his opponent, cutting off his words by saying that this was no one's business. The guy in the red uniform grins at first, raising his hands, taking on a harmless position. Next, he pushes Eugene away from him with a kick in the leg, spreading his arms to the side, causing the lower one to fall, shouting that he doesn't dare to attack like that. Now he grabs Eugene by the collar, who is trying to understand what happened. The guy lifts him off the ground, clearly demonstrating his strength to him while the blonde was nearby. Eugene opened his eyes slightly, grabbing the offender's hand while he shouted that he did not dare to dig into Class D. Then the guy lets go of his victim, causing him to fall to the ground with a roar, while he himself began to move away, throwing words at him that he could complain about it to your brother. The blonde notes that this behavior occurs every time his younger brother is mentioned. Eugene grabs his leg. Trying to come to his senses, opening his eyes, he sees in front of him the hand of a man who used his power. Eugene looks in surprise at Seokwoo, who caused a flash of light with his power, crouched in front of him and complained about what happened because they didn't even have time to enter the dungeon yet. Eugene frowned as he listened to him say that because of his class, he would have to rely on someone and have to endure it. The young man smiles radiantly, closing his eyes. He accepts the help of the boss with a smile, who extended his hand to him and tried to help him get up, while Eugene thanked him for being accepted into the dungeon, despite his level. They clasped their hands tightly, while the young man said that Seokwoo himself works hard, reconciling his subordinates. The boss lit up with happiness after hearing his words of gratitude and noted that Eugene is the only one who notices his efforts. The young man looked at him, a little nervous, thinking about the fact that he had been exposed. Eugene hurriedly picks up his cap from the ground. Next, on crutches, the guy walks behind his squad, looking at how the boss slaps the offender on the head with the words that he should stop bothering the young man because he is as useful as the others and has enough experience, and with him the purge will go quickly. Eugene used his power to test the subject's upbringing, which he called out mentally. While the boss was diligently scolding his subordinates, Eugene added the head of the guild to the objects of education and almost agreed with the words of his offender. Seokwoo gathered the squad around him and gave the order to enter, urging Eugene to catch up with them on crutches, mentally noting that he had always survived thanks to his skill. We were transported to the dungeon area. Huge old walls with small gates were surrounded by tree roots. Two huge and terrible bats were moving straight towards the guys. The guys from the guild began to defend themselves from the giant monsters, hiding behind their shields and using their magical powers. One of the giant bats' corpses lay on the ground. The guys grinned at this, realizing that during the strike into the dungeons, they were shivering at the mere sight of such creatures. Suddenly, the monster's corpse began to evaporate and turn into a sparkling crystal. Sayaku and the guy in the red jacket watched the sparkling crystal with delight. Sayaku didn't expect that they could earn so much from one monster. The F-class player noticed that the crystal was large, realizing that with such a size, even a D-class magic stone would cost several hundred. The protagonist looked at the guy with an anxious look and held a small crystal in his hand. He replied that he did not find anything serious, except for small stones that could be considered waste. Eugene turned around in frustration and began hammering on the walls with his pickaxe. He was very angry that he was mistaken for cheap labor, comparing himself to Cinderella. Eugene humbly lowered his head, realizing that he was like a young orphan. Eugene lost his parents, and even his younger brother turned his back on him. Eugene recalled how his younger brother Yuyun came to the door and was about to leave, taking his backpack with him. Yuhyun in his cloak stood on a stone ledge surrounded by his comrades in black jackets. Eugene remembered that, while he was in the army, his brother gathered hunters and created the Abyss Guild, and as the Abyss was recognized as the strongest guild in the country, Yuyun became somehow unattainable. The main character recalled with longing how his brother's entire squad left him alone. Eugene humbly lowered his head at that moment, leaving him completely alone. From such a situation, when he was left alone, he clenched his fists tightly. He felt that he was unlucky and did not awaken, although he really wanted to. A bunch of all sorts of papers and cards were floating in the air, as if the wind had blown on them. Eugene then spent all the money left after quitting his job and found a broker who was supposed to awaken him. He recalled that he fell for their flattering interactions, that they would take care of him since he was an S-class brother. He recalled that he had done a lot of bad things, after which he was still able to awaken only to the F class, realizing that his brother had received the highest rank. Eugene's slender fingers touched the scattered newspapers and papers. He remembered that his name was always mentioned in the press, and he fell into a debt trap. Eugene looked with disgust at his little brother, who was sitting on the floor with his head down. Eugene then noted that Eugene should have been ashamed of such a nickname. Eugene arrogantly leaned towards his saddened brother and stated that he was not a teacher at that moment, but simply a burden that prevented him from moving on. The protagonist desperately stretched his hand after his brother, who indifferently stood with his back to him. Eugene noticed at that moment that everything turned out very well, because Eugene would no longer get into trouble in the dungeon. Eugene looked at his brother with disgust and told him to live calmly and quietly from now on, and not interfere with his younger brother's development further. A strong blow from the pick broke off a piece of stone from the rock. The protagonist looked down sadly, whose face was covered in abrasions covered with bandages. The words that came out of Eugene's mouth were that he truly deserved to be abandoned. The main character continued to recall with annoyance how his brother, surrounded by his guild comrades, went towards his adventures. Eugene thought of himself as the weak older brother of the great S-class hunter, like a parasite trying to extract benefits from him, suddenly noting that this was not a delusion. In the dark and dusty space of the dungeon, Eugene continued to work with his pickaxe. The protagonist realized that he was an F-class hunter and was still able to survive in a dungeon where people constantly died, only thanks to one skill that took advantage of others. Eugene looked forward with a cold gaze. In the past, his nickname is Teacher. Eugene's silhouette was illuminated by the dim light. As he sat on a chair with everyone he knew and his brother in the background, he knew that this ability, given to him upon awakening, allowed him to influence those around him. Joyful and inspired, Eugene and his brother headed forward. He recalled he could influence from someone close to him, just like his brother, whom he personally cared for and raised, to people he met and became friends with. Eugene recalled how he brought glasses to his boys, who did not appreciate it. He used his code word for such subjects, cheer up, and they immediately became his pupils. The protagonist crawled out of cover and directed a green aura from his hands towards his guys. He used the small buff to their development, because this was his main skill as a teacher. Eugene swung his pickaxe, throwing it behind his head. He wondered how it was possible to survive with such a skill in the dungeon, even if the F-class was purely a support. Eugene watched with wide-eyed horror at the explosion in which his comrades died. He was considered a cave cricket, like a parasite that survived alone, even when everyone else in his team died. Eugene watched from a high ledge as a huge lizard monster killed two of his comrades. Ygo knew that he survived not because he was lucky, and not because he was constantly in the rear. Eugene tried to get his dagger from behind his back. In fact, the teacher had another hidden skill. It was this skill that saved him every time in a crisis, and it was thanks to it that he could survive, despite the death of everyone else. The main character widened his eyes and looked down in surprise. Notification. The effect of the title teacher appears. The additional skill Last Retribution is launched. The protagonist swung his pickaxe and noticed how it began to glow in his hands, realizing that his additional skill should now be activated. Notification. The skills and abilities of the object of education are transferred twice as much. Eugene looked at his pickaxe in amazement as he held it in his hands. He felt the power flowing into him and the abilities of his boss too. A magic circle with a pattern of increasing strength appeared near Eugene's pickaxe. The teacher immediately froze and opened his mouth, throwing his pickaxe to the ground. Eugene desperately rushed forward. Jumping on his crutches, he understood that this could not happen in a D-class dungeon. He understood that this was a hidden skill, the Last Retribution. The hieroglyph of the tombstone in the red circle glowed in the air. The abilities and skills of the pupil, improved by him, were temporarily transferred to him with redoubled force. A huge tunnel in the cave led to the exit. Eugene knew that if the student's speed was 100, then he would be able to run at a speed of 200, and his strength would also be twice as strong. The main character walked forward in a daze and stopped in the moment, his eyes wide. He knew that thanks to this skill, he always survived, but he still considered it an unimaginably bad skill since the condition for activating it was very painful. Eugene sat on that very chair, surrounded by all his friends, whose faces were crossed out with a red cross, except for his brother. The teacher understood that the very fact of activating this skill meant a very bad event. Eugene mentioned his boss Sayakwu, whose face was also crossed out with a red cross. Eugene didn't believe that anything bad could happen to his boss. Eugene reached the spot and stepped into a pool of blood. The main character saw a bloody gorge in front of him, and the corpses of his team lay there. Eugene knew that the fact of activating the skill meant the death of the object. The protagonist looked in horror at Seokwoo's bloody and lifeless body, trying to call out to him. The teacher turned his gaze upward to the screams. Eugene looked up and saw a huge angry dragon, which was holding in its mouth the guy in the red jacket with whom he had a conflict. Eugene looked on with alarm as blood sprayed from the sky from the dragon's mouth. Two angry dragon heads looked at Eugene. He realized that it was the king of the dragons of poison and curses, Lachetus. A huge and angry dragon stood on a rock and looked at little Eugene, who stood in front of a pool of blood and a pile of corpses of his comrades. The teacher did not understand why such a monster was in this place. The three-headed dragon Lachetus was on a rocky ridge and looked around. The main character looked at the dragon with horror, realizing that this simply could not happen. One of the dragon's heads glared at Eugene and opened its mouth. The teacher understood that he was in a D-level dungeon. Eugene ran back sharply, throwing his bones to the sides as the enraged dragon tried to eat him. The protagonist did not understand why a Class 1 dragon family like Lachetus was in this dungeon. Eugene's foot glowed with a bright light and barely touched the ground. He used the leg enhancement skill. With quick movements of his feet, Eugene was able to run into a small cave. Looking dumbfounded, he understood that he had a superior skill, strengthening the D-class frame, having twice its effect. Eugene saw in the distance a small gorge in the rock that he needed to run into. He was going to use this speed to hide where this monster couldn't catch him. Right in front of Eugene, an angry dragon swung its tail and blocked the path in front of the gorge, destroying the entire land. Eugene pulled his crutches aside and looked down as a deep hole appeared in front of him after the collapse, into which the dragon dived. Dinner looked on anxiously as the enraged Lachetus advanced towards him, swinging its tail. He thought that if he could strengthen his arms, he would block the blow. At that same second, with a light and quick swing of its tail, the dragon threw Eugene's body high. The main character flopped to the ground with his whole body. From such a strong fall, Eugene's blood dripped onto the ground. Eugene was lying on the ground and, raising his hand, noticed with a frightened expression that blood was flowing from his nose. The enraged Lachetus did not move far and was about to complete his attack. The teacher understood that he could not match the dragon, even with twice the strength of the boss's skill. The protagonist recalled the last minutes of his team's life, where the boss held the wounded body of a fighter, telling him that even a healing potion would not have helped. Eugene felt like he was being covered with dying memories. The guy in the red shirt and Eugene's memories turned back angrily, preparing to fight alone, yelling at his superior to hide in the corner. With sorrow, the main character recalled the moment of his death when the guy was going to gain time, but did not have time, and he was overtaken by death in the form of a dragon, and all his blood fell on the face of the boss. The wounded Eugene scrambled on the ground, realizing that he could suffer the same fate. Eugene couldn't walk, and so he crawled on the ground, dragging his feet on the ground. He understood that with such legs, he could not escape. The exhausted main character raised his head and watched as the dragon advanced towards him in anger. He understood that in the end, he would die. The enraged dragon opened its mouth and was about to pounce on Eugene, who closed his eyes tightly and awaited his death. Suddenly, a powerful and strong explosion sounded right in front of the dragon, causing it to start shaking its heads. At the same second, Eugene's immobilized and humble body was picked up by his younger brother. The main character lay on Eugene's back and, widening his eyes, hopefully said the name of his younger brother. Eugene managed to hide his brother behind a block of stone and told him to stay behind the stone, as he was going to deal with the monsters himself, taking out his long sword. Eugene looked out from behind the stone, dumbfounded, trying to convey to his brother that even he could not cope with the three-headed enemy. Eugene straightened his shoulders proudly and threw his sword aside, looking straight into the face of the enraged Lachetus. Eugene whispered quietly, then he activated the blue willow leaf skill. At the same instant, Eugene's entire angry silhouette was surrounded by a blue magical aura with blue leaves. Eugene, with a deft movement of his body, jumped away from these leaves floating in the air. Eugene deftly swung through the air, flying past the dragon's heads, floating in his magical aura with his sword. Eugene held the handle tightly when suddenly it glowed with a bright purple aura. Eugene frowned at the dragon, and with a wave of his hand, summoned a wave of purple magical aura. The protagonist's younger brother looked down in disdain, pointing his reincarnated purple sword towards the dragon. Eugene attacked the dragon from the air, trying to thrust his sword into the La Cheetah's dragon. Eugene watched in admiration as the fight between his brother and the angry dragon took place, realizing that his brother's attacks were too fast. Eugene looked down at the dragon with disdain. He continued to point his sword towards the dragon, with his hand raised above the hilt. The main character understood that this was an S-class battle. Eugene cast a questioning glance to the side when he saw that one of the dragon's heads was trying to pounce on him from the side. Haiyan quickly flew into the air, trying to dodge the green poisonous stream from the dragon's mouth, which was supposed to incinerate him. Eugene, realizing that there was no way his brother would have time to dodge this poisonous attack, rushed to his brother's aid, putting his sword in front of him, using the activation of a giant shield. Eugene bared his teeth in pain as some of the poison still got into him. Eugene was very worried about his brother and shouted his name as Haiyan looked towards the dragon with anger and contempt. Haiyan swung his sword away from the dragon's poisonous attack, and all the sweat of the poison was thrown aside. Haiyan looked worriedly as his sword melted from the dragon's poisonous attack. Eugene watched his brother with despair, realizing that the blade of the sword would no longer help them. The main character carefully watched the intense fight of his brother, who confidently fought with La Cheetah's. Eugene did not understand the behavior of his brother, who tried to protect him in this way, noting to himself that his brother could fight more freely. Eugene, with a quick movement of his body, again tried to dodge the dragon's poisonous spit, throwing an angry look at him from behind. Eugene understood that this was the only way his brother could protect both of them. Eugene turned his attention to the undead Eugene team. Eugene offendedly shouted to his brother that he went into the dungeon without knowing his place at all, which all led to sad consequences. Eugene sarcastically asked his brother about how long he plans to leave a trail behind him to clean up after him. Eugene frowned at his older brother, who fearfully raised his head up. Haiyan remarked rudely to his brother that he constantly told him that he should have lived quietly and peacefully. The teacher ironically asked his brother that he had come to the battlefield to express all this to his face. The dragon opened its mouth angrily. Eugene tried to ironically tease his brother about how he was already tired of his older brother's tutelage. The main character could barely stand on his feet, but still tried to move forward. Eugene looked at his brother angrily. Lowering his head down, Haiyan stood his ground and tried to tell his brother not to come out and hide, but Eugene got tired of hiding in the shadows and started his own plan. Eugene grabbed his sword and attacked the dragon, trying to thrust his blue aura sword deeper. Haiyan held his sword out in front of him as one of the dragon's heads approached him. Haiyan didn't understand what his older brother was doing. Eugene let go of the sword and threw it to the ground. Jin humbly lowered his head, throwing the sword from his hands. The main character was offended by such injustice because he understood that if his brother saved him, he would again become a burden to him, so he decided for himself that Haiyan left him to die. The protagonist frowned forward. He replied with self-irony that even for someone who died in a dungeon, there would be no need to arrange a funeral. Eugene once again remembered the moment when the entire team turned away from him and left. He felt that he was already tired of such a life. Eugene raised his head and spread his arms to the side, watching as he was about to be devoured by the enraged dragon. Eugene closed his eyes tightly, already mentally preparing for death. Eugene immediately spread his hand to the side, trying to strike with his purple aura. Eugene flew with all his might to help his brother, whose silhouette humbly stood on the ground and was almost overtaken by the paw of a dragon with sharp claws. A powerful explosion occurred, from which a violet aura intertwined with poisonous gusts. Drops of blood appeared on the ground. Eugene widened his eyes and abruptly averted them to the side. Eugene lay on the ground and looked towards his brother, who decided to save him, sacrificing his body, receiving huge holes from the dragon's claws. Eugene wondered, since when did things go wrong for them? Eugene knew that they were brothers who had no one else. The main character recalled a sad moment when he and his brother were at the wake of their parents. A photograph of their parents stood near white flowers with sorrow. The protagonist noted that it was hard for them after the death of their parents. At that moment, their sad gazes crossed as Eugene held a flower in his hands. Then little Haiyan became interested in how his older brother felt. The brothers held hands and planned to cook dinner together. They understood that in the whole world, they were the only ones who had each other. Drops of blood continued to drip from Eugene's body. Eugene was alarmed that his brother had received such deep wounds and tried to call out to him, asking if he was okay. Eugene held the exhausted and wounded body of his brother as a huge and ferocious dragon destroyed the entire earth and its path to get to the guys. The ferocious dragon was burning in flames when Eugene showed signs of life and rested his hand on the ground. Eugene turned to his older brother with a heavy sigh, telling him that La Cheetahs falls asleep every 5 hours. The main character looked dumbfounded at his brother, who noticed to him that if he held on for another hour, the monster would fall asleep. Eugene again remembered the moment when the guards carried him out of the office with crutches. Eugene remembered that, even when his bones were crushed into small pieces, Eugene never visited him in the hospital. Eugene at the same moment desperately reached out his hand to his brother, who stood indifferently in the distance. Eugene remembered that even when he asked his brother for help, he pushed him away with extreme coldness. The memory of the main character remains that very painful moment when his younger brother looked at him with contempt, who abandoned him and told him to live quietly without sticking his head out. Eugene was very worried about the question, why now his brother came to the rescue, and began to smile. Exhausted, Eugene held out a small yellow stone with his last breath, telling his brother to take the stone. Eugene extended his hand, and Eugene gave him the stone, telling him that it was the gate stone with which he could get out. Eugene grabbed his brother, who sighed heavily, and held onto his wounds on his body. The teacher understood that he could not take the stone, since it was more important to heal the wounds on his brother's body. Eugene, with a bloody face, looked humbly at his brother. Eugene added that he would not be able to use the gate stone. Eugene put his hand on his brother's shoulder. Eugene was living the last seconds of his life and fell exhausted on his brother's body. Eugene looked frantically at his brother, who lay motionless with his eyes closed, and tried to call out to him. The protagonist looked forward in shock as a bright blue light shone in front of him. Eugene continued to hold his brother's immobilized body as a magical blue funnel appeared near them. The effect of the title of teacher has appeared. The duration of the additional skill, the last reward, is 1 hour. The main character watched in numbness as everything around them was surrounded by a blue magical aura. Notice that the skills and abilities of the deceased Eugene have been transferred to Eugene with double strength. The enraged dragon, along with its 3 heads, opened its mouth as Eugene's body was pierced by a bright blue light. The protagonist raised his head to the dragon, baring his teeth. The dragon La Cheetahs struck the place where the 2 brothers were with his powerful paw, destroying the entire earth. Eugene, with the help of his brother's blue magic beam skills, was able to dodge the dragon strike, flying into the air and holding his deceased brother's body. The main character landed nearby. Eugene suddenly and reverently clutched the body of his late brother, calling him a fool. Suddenly, power with a purple magical aura began to flow through Eugene's fingers. A magical purple spear appeared in front of Eugene, which he was about to take. Eugene held this spear in his hands and bowed before the deceased body of his younger brother, which lay on the cold ground. Eugene continued to hug his deceased brother's body, holding his staff in front of him as protection. Eugene pointed out that he should make it a brother even until the very end. A ferocious dragon was approaching the main character, who was looking at the dead body of his brother with mental pain. At the same instant, Eugene flew into the air and with a deft wave of his hands dealt a crushing blow to the dragon with his spear. Eugene, looking out from under his long bangs at the dragon, I noticed that he carried out the attack slowly. In a furious look, the main character swung his spear and was about to destroy the dragon that killed his brother by piercing the body of La Cheetahs. Eugene held the spear menacingly and noticed that he had twice the strength of his incredible brother. Eugene held onto his spear tightly as the dragon fell from such a powerful blow, sending a cloud of dust into the air. Eugene realized that along with the power, he also received the memories of his younger brother. In Eugene's memories, he was holding his brother's card, noticing that Eugene had awakened as an F class. Eugene carefully examined his brother's file and realized that he should not have contacted his brother. The protagonist soared into the air and aimed at the dragon with his angry gaze, swinging his staff. Gaining great speed, Eugene landed and ran towards the dragon, who was waiting for him. With a deft movement, he jumped away from the dragon's head. Flying high into the air, Eugene swung his spear. Aiming with his gaze, Eugene was about to deliver a crushing blow under La Cheetahs. Eugene was then in the hospital with his leg and arm bandaged. Eugene was very angry with himself for not being able to prevent the moment for his brother to remain unharmed and not lie in a hospital bed. The main character noticed the moment when his angry younger brother ordered his assistants to deal with the scoundrels who broke Eugene's legs. Eugene struck the dragon's body with a powerful blow, causing everything around to sparkle with a bright aura and blood. That very painful moment, when Eugene was held by the very guards who were supposed to protect him, Eugene told his guard to tell his brother that he was forbidden to provide a healer. Eugene ordered his guards to throw his brother out the door, providing only financial assistance. Eugene felt terrible. Experiencing a deep sense of guilt, he stood in front of his reflection with his head bowed. He told the guards to frame the whole situation as if he was forced to do this only because they were brothers. Eugene desperately punched the wall. Clenching his teeth, Eugene understood that such a situation would be better for his brother than if he went to die in the dungeon. Eugene was very ashamed in front of his brother and mentally asked Eugene for forgiveness. Eugene sat on the floor, resting his head on his crossed arms, feeling hurt and annoyed by what had happened. He really wanted Eugene not to go to the dungeon under any circumstances. In the dungeon, where Eugene was fighting a fierce battle with the monster, it began to rain. Eugene held onto his staff. He stood on the dragon's dead body in the heavy downpour. The dragon's head, with its tongue hanging out of its mouth, lay immobilized on the ground. Eugene, seeing with his own eyes the entire chronology of events, grinned maliciously. He ironically noted about his brother that he took too much upon himself, deciding to come up with such a plan, and without telling him anything. Eugene was soaked from the heavy rain and held onto his staff. Breaking into a mocking smile, he wondered what he should do now in such a situation, because he could not expect this, realizing that he still shackled the entire realization of his younger brother with his behavior. Eugene wondered what he would be doing now if he could survive. A shortcut appeared with a notification that Eugene received an impossible achievement by killing the dragon. Eugene suddenly looked at the icon, which said that he was being given the legendary title of Dragon Slayer. The protagonist widened his eyes when a bunch of notifications with rewards popped up in front of him. As a reward, he was given 10 gate stones, 5 acquired class 1 liquids, and the great sword of the Scarlet Dragon. The most important event was the wishing stone, which could fulfill his any desire. Eugene looked with anticipation at the shining crystal above the dead body of the dragon. The crystal emitted a bright light from itself. Floating in the air, Eugene thought about what he should choose as his wish. Eugene suddenly raised his hand to the crystal and made a wish for his brother to be resurrected. A notification came out that he could make any wish except to resurrect the dead. The teacher sat down near the stone and looked at it frantically. He was discouraged and did not understand what kind of wish he should make in this case. Eugene imagined himself in a new way as he stood at a crosswalk during a rainstorm and looked around. He thought about becoming the strongest hunter, a new hero. Eugene presented himself as popular when his face was shown on the city's big screens. He also thought that this time he could get the role that he had been jealous of for so long, noting that he could have wished for even greater honor. The main character was tormented in doubt about the choice of desires with his head down. His black silhouette with a sword behind his back stood under a heavy downpour. Eugene determined his wish and wished to turn back time to a time when his younger brother had not yet died. Shards of a shining crystal floated above the protagonist's hands. A notification popped up, asking if Eugene really decided to turn back time. Eugene looked at the stone suddenly and noted that this was the final decision. Suddenly, bright rays of light and air currents spread out from the crystal. Eugene humbly closed his eyes and awaited his further fate. He knew that he would not allow something like this to happen again. Eugene found himself in a different space, raising his eyebrows with a dumbfounded look. Eugene was dressed in normal casual clothes and sat on the sofa, looking around. It was a large, spacious office that was well lit. Eugene realized his hand and looked at it, trying to see the changes. He realized that he was in the main building of the Abyss Guild of his younger brother, realizing that he had indeed found himself in the past. The protagonist took out his phone and looked at the date and time. He realized that he had returned 5 years ago, wondering at the same time about that why this place. He grabbed his phone and began to study the date more carefully. It dawned on him that he had arrived on the day when he found the broker upon awakening. Eugene leaned his hand on the sofa and froze in the moment, realizing that now there would be a certain stage in his life. The footsteps of his brother were heard, who was about to enter his room. The door to the room began to open. Eugene cast his stunned glance towards his brother, who had entered, who bared his teeth slightly as he was very dissatisfied. Eugene frowned deeply and told his brother not to be in this room again. The main character looked in awe at his living younger brother. The protagonist rushed to run towards his brother, realizing that he was able to return. Eugene pulled his brother into a tight hug causing Eugene to throw his arms to the side and look confused. Eugene looked at his brother questioningly. As Eugene continued to hug his brother tightly, Eugene was very happy that his brother Eugene was alive. Eugene continued to look at his brother, who was very happy about this meeting. Puzzled, without letting go of his brother's embrace, Eugene apologized to his brother. The main character pressed his face into the body of his brother, who did not understand what was happening and why suddenly his older brother began to apologize for everything he could, noting his unreasonable behavior. The guys were in a spacious, bright office. Eugene frantically asked his brother that he could get into even bigger problems. Eugene replied sharply that it was something else. Eugene extended his hand behind his brother's head and pressed himself even closer to him. Eugene said he just thought about it while walking to his office, noticing that he was 20 years old now, although he was 25 years old at the time of his death. Eugene looked at his brother with excitement, as Eugene looked at his brother with excitement, Eugene happily noted that he would no longer create a fuss or cause problems for his brother. Eugene looked at his brother very reverently as he turned to him. Eugene, in response to such pleasant words, snuggled up to his older brother. Eugene closed his eyes and smiled. He felt incredible relief, realizing that he was guilty before his younger brother. Eugene remembered his little brother and himself when they returned from school. Playing with each other, Eugene was incredibly happy that at least now he could return everything back. The little happy brothers were happy with each other and smiled. Eugene understood that they were brothers who had no one but each other. Eugene leaned away from his brother slightly. Still holding him, he approached Eugene, telling him that he loved him very much. The main character thought to himself that now he will forget about awakening and the hunters and will calmly sit in his place. Notification: the recording of the awakened Eugene is completed. The protagonist excitedly raised his head, rejoicing at what was happening. Notifications came out that the legendary titles had been received: Dragon Slayer, an ideal educator. An additional skill called My Child is the Best was also launched. Eugene's pupil's growth rate was doubled, to which Eugene was surprised. Delicious bacon and eggs and soup were cooking on the stove. Eugene put on an apron and prepared to eat. Turning towards his brother, Eugene said that everything will be ready soon, so Eugene needs to wait a little and sit quietly. Eugene answered happily. The main character was sitting at the table and waiting for his brother to prepare food. He felt awkward about the situation. Eugene recalled how he had a heated argument with his brother at the same time and was about to leave home. At the moment, Eugene was smiling with satisfaction and anxiously preparing food. Eugene crossed his arms and waited with anticipation for Eugene's dish to be ready. He was glad they made up, but he didn't expect them to have dinner together. Eugene's expression changed slightly, and he raised his finger in the air, trying to bring up the status window. In the memory window, there was a red tag with his title of Dragon Slayer L, which proved that he had killed one of the Class 1 dragons alone. Eugene didn't think that he would awaken like this again, trying to find out his rank. The protagonist touched the red label in the status window. He understood that the L class meant a legendary class, even stronger than the S class. The teacher spread his arms, sitting at the table, and watched as from more labels with different hieroglyphs appeared around the emblem with the dragon. Eugene was surprised that he received 4 skills from this title alone. The protagonist looked at what was happening in shock. There were 4 emblems with different skills in the status window. There was Poison Resistant Cell, Curse Resistant Cell, Fear Resistant Cell, and Predator Lachitas SS. Eugene realized that this was the first time he had seen such skills, especially L-class resistances that were supposed to be resistant to any poison, curse, and intimidation below legendary class. He also noted that he could still use double strength against representatives of dragons similar to Lachitas. Eugene raised his hands in front of him and clenched his fists. He suggested that he could become the strongest after rolling back. The main character continued to clench his fists as he continued to carefully examine the window with his skills. Eugene imagined a fight with a dragon. His brother and his comrade tried to hide from the attacks coming at them, noticing that the dragon's power was powerful, and this was the end for them. The dragon opened his mouth and was about to splash out a huge poisonous stream. Eugene understood that if they came into contact with the deadly poison that this dragon emitted, they would die suddenly. Eugene's voice was heard from the side, telling the guys to move away. The main character covered Eugene's body with his arms outstretched to the sides. Eugene threw his malicious grin towards his brother. Eugene noticed that he arrived at the scene and sarcastically asked what they needed to do with the deadly poison. Eugene sparkled and shone with a bright light, spreading a joyful smile. Eugene looked at him questioningly, as Eugene noted that the deadly poison was just a refreshing shower. For a true hunter, Eugene noticed that his brother was cool. Eugene, with his fist raised, proudly imagined how he held his little brother in his arms to him. This sounded like the beginning of the legend of the Eugene Dragon's Lair. The protagonist, inspired by this idea of his life, clicked on the screen of his status window. He understood that this was how he would become the strongest hunter and be able to live well, noting that he would become the first representative of the L class. Eugene poked his finger on the black screen, choosing his skill level: Stamina 6, Strength 4, Agility 5, Intelligence 4, Mana 2. Eugene realized that his peak was F class and sadly imagined how the dragon would defeat him in this case. Eugene grabbed his head and pressed it to the table. When Eugene looked at him questioningly, the main character understood that his body remained the same and tried to think about how he could use all these skills. The main character looked at the screen with annoyance and held his head. He noted with self-irony that this time there was nothing special about him either. There were two icons on the screen, with the skill buffing skill E and intelligence buffing E. He understood that the buff skills of agility and intelligence were E grade, which were similar to the previous skills. Eugene looked carefully at the screen and pressed his finger on the teacher icon. This was the title of teacher, which also changed to L class. Eugene looked at the skill screen indignantly, with one hand on his head. Eugene's finger touched one of the three skills called LS Final Gratitude. Realizing that it was better not to use it, Eugene also noticed that the names of all these ranks sounded disgusting. Eugene imagined the title of my child as the best L, seeing on the screen that he was communicating with his brother, and suddenly, unexpectedly, thanks to the code word, his brother suddenly began to emit a fiery aura from himself. This was the accelerated growth of an object under the influence of a code word. Validity period: 3 days. Eugene understood that this title was similar to the previous title of educator. Eugene cast his puzzled glance towards his brother, who was very surprised at the increased growth rate. Eugene realized that Eugene would become 2 times faster and stronger than other hunters, realizing that all this could be used with a skill called Our Child is So Incredible SS. The properties of this skill were that, if you support the object of education with a code word in front of more than 5 beings with intelligence, then the abilities and effect of the object skills increase relative to the number of living being, reaching 100% effectiveness. Eugene thought, holding his chin with his hand, that if he supports Eugene in front of 50 people, he will become 15 times stronger, and if in front of 100, then he will become 2 times stronger. The protagonist imagined himself as a king, bathed in gold, and his red cape held by his brother and several other people. He imagined that in this way, he would be reborn as a teacher who raised an entire guild. He understood that, if he was lucky and everything worked out so well, he would be able to live richly and happily all his life. Icon with code word, love. Eugene grabbed his head and leaned against the table in frustration, to which his younger brother immediately reacted. Eugene didn't understand who came up with such a terrible code word. Eugene remembered the moment when he held his brother and confessed his brotherly love to him. Eugene realized that the code word had changed during his awakening. Eugene, with tears in his eyes and irony, began to imagine how he walked around and confessed his love to everyone, even small children. He joked sarcastically to himself, realizing that if he walked around like that and threw around such words, he would simply be arrested and he would not be able to educate anyone. Eugene stood at the screen with a downcast face and pointed his finger at it. He was a little desperate and knew that it would all be useless since he wouldn't be able to use it. Noting that the skill itself was good on the screen, Eugene saw the latest skill called Promising Cutting. As Eugene looked at all the people around him and saw letters above their heads, this skill suggested that he could check the class of unawakened people and objects under the influence of the code word, could awaken with optimal talents. Eugene looked pensive, still contemplating his bright future, when Eugene walked over to the table and began serving food on plates. Eugene looked at his brother and handed him a plate of rice. He asked if Eugene had enough rice. The main character gladly picked up a plate of rice and thanked his brother, saying that he would eat everything with great appetite. Eugene noted that he cooked everything from what they had at home, so he didn't know what his dish tasted like. Eugene put a spoonful of rice in his mouth and began to chew it with a puzzled face. The protagonist continued to eat the rice with gusto, and the younger brother looked at it all with admiration. He was glad that he cooked deliciously, and Eugene noticed it. Eugene looked at his brother warmly and added that if he wants more, then let him say so. Eugene began to look down in slight confusion as Suhayan began to explain the reason for this phenomenon. Eugene replied, that it was safer to cook by himself because at that time there were items for detoxification and removal of curses, although such things had not existed before. Eugene asked if there were cases where people added poison or cursed food. Eugene held the spoon in his hands and noticed that he was the only youth who performed alone and was restrained. Eugene recalled walking past a crowd of people who looked at him with contempt. He replied that there were other guilds that grew in agreement with large corporations, but he already knew then that he would not join anywhere and would create his own guild. Eugene immediately grabbed Yuyan's face and squeezed it. Yuyan added that if he had obediently entered a suitable guild, it would have been better, but he did not want that. Eugene worriedly grabbed Yuyan's face and brought it closer to him. Eugene was very angry with his brother for not telling him anything about this. Yuyan lowered his head in annoyance, telling Eugene to change his expression. The main character looked anxiously at his younger brother, who noticed that he had chosen this path himself. Eugene and his brother were sitting in the kitchen, near the sink. Yuyan said that one thing that constantly bothered him was that his behavior had caused his relationship with his brother to deteriorate. Yuyan recalled how he ordered his guards to limit their communication. Yuyan explained that he watched his every action and interfered in every matter, trying to make sure that Yuyan did not catch anyone's attention, and deliberately moved away, afraid that they would touch his only brother. Yuyan lowered his eyes in shame as Eugene put his hand on his shoulder and tried to cheer his brother up. Eugene noted that this should have been said right away, to which Yuyan replied that he did not want to burden him. Yuyan noted that if he had spoken later, Eugene would not have understood him. Yuyan extended his hand to his shoulder, where Eugene's hand was. Yuyan noted that he was wrong in his assumptions. Yuyan looked at his brother in awe and carefully held his hand. Yuyan warmly noted that Eugene still thought and worried about him, and also apologized and said warm words of love. Yuyan broke out into a bright smile and closed his eyes, thanking his brother for saying such kind words despite him acting so disgustingly. Eugene looked at his brother with pride and sympathy. At that very second, Eugene began waving his chopsticks and smiling maliciously. He noticed that there was nothing to thank him for, because Yuyan had already suffered enough during his time, so he offered to try some delicious food. Yuyan happily agreed to this proposal. Jin sat with his brother at the table with food and looked peaceful. He was happy because he turned back time and it was the best day of his life. Yuyan, still chewing a piece of food, took out his phone and looked at it. Puzzled, Yuyan noted that he had a job and needed to go. Noting that he had one thing for Eugene to do, Yuyan stood up from the table and took off his apron. Yuyan turned to his brother and told him to delete the broker's contact. Upon awakening, Eugene immediately rushed to fulfill the condition, to which Yuyan added that in any case the broker would not answer him now, even though Eugene could try to contact him. Yuyan looked at his brother's phone with contempt, waiting for the number to be deleted. Eugene at this moment was thinking that Yuyan was unlikely to get rid of all brokers. Yuyan threw on his jacket and said goodbye to his brother, who waved goodbye to him. Yuyan replied that Yuyan could work peacefully and he would take care of the rest. Yuyan noticed that his brother was getting ready to go somewhere, so he tried to surprise him. Yuyan stopped at the exit and held his hand on the door. Yuyan noted that Yuyan will not go anywhere now. Yuyan looked at his brother, who was frozen in the moment by such a statement. Yuyan added that Eugene should not go out anywhere and live here in his house. Yuyan was shocked by what he heard and continued to hold his hand in the air. Sunlight filtered through the windows into the apartment. Eugene asked his younger brother what his words meant. The main character looked at Yuyan with confusion and puzzlement, his eyes wide. Eugene asked Yuyan why he couldn't leave the apartment. Yuyan looked at his older brother with concern. Smiling slightly, Yuyan told the main character that it was dangerous outside, so he shouldn't go out. Yuyan imagined the people around Eugene, who were looking at him with deceit and malice. Yuyan told his older brother that he was fine because he kept him at a distance, but now his enemies might target him, and there is no telling when they might make an attempt on his life. Yuyan pointed out that he couldn't let Eugene walk around alone. Yuyan told Eugene that this is precisely the reason why he cannot go out. Yuyan spread his arms to the sides, beaming with joy and smiling widely. Yuyan told his older brother that from now on, he will only be in that apartment. The main character looked at his younger brother with concern and panic, his mouth slightly open. Eugene rushed towards the door in a daze, not wanting to stay locked up. An obstacle appeared in front of Eugene's face that prevented him from passing, causing him to widen his eyes in fear. Yuyan looked at the main character with satisfaction. Smiling slightly, Yuyan reminded his brother that he said everything was fine. Hyun remembered the moment when Eugene stood in front of him with his hand on his shoulder. Hyun reminded his brother that he apologized to him, told him he loved him, and accepted everything he did. Hyun closed his eyes in embarrassment and raised his finger to his nose, tilting his head slightly. Hyun told the protagonist what this meant to him. As if he had received permission, Eugene looked at his younger brother with despondency and incomprehension. The weather was beautiful outside. The main character did not understand how this could mean something like this. Eugene was lying on the floor, face down, among scattered things and boxes. The main character hurriedly began to pack his things into a backpack. Eugene said that he needed to take everything he needed and run away before his younger brother returned. The main character cautiously looked back at the apartment. Opening the front door, he thought that he would spend his whole life locked up if he was wrong. Kim stood in front of the open door, gloomily looking at the main character. Kim frowned unkindly and opened his mouth slightly. Eugene looked out of the door with wariness and fear, looking at Kim. The main character introduced Kim by holding his hands in front of him, clenched into fists. The protagonist noticed that this was a class abyss hunter, Kim Hyun's confidant, with a powerful defensive skill. The main character stood close to Kim. Eugene asked Kim to step aside. Kim objected negatively to the main character. Kim held the door with his hand. From where the main character looked out warily, Kim told the protagonist that Hyun ordered to make sure he doesn't go out. The protagonist was surprised that his younger brother assigned in a class guard. Kim closed his eyes and sighed heavily, putting his hand to his face. Kim put his big hand on the main character's shoulder. Kim told the protagonist that he would not speak at length and ordered him to obediently return to the room. Kim held the main character by the shoulders, overwhelming him with his powerful aura. Kim told the protagonist that otherwise, he would push him there by force. The main character looked at Kim with numbness and anxiety. The protagonist was shaking with fear. He thought that he should not be afraid. Eugene opened his eyes in surprise. A notification window appeared in front of him. Activation of resistance to fear. The suppression is cancelled. The main character remembered the red icon with the image of ghosts. The protagonist noticed that his trembling disappeared thanks to the skill. Due to the use of the skill, the main character's eye briefly turned blue, after which it suddenly disappeared. In the eyes of the protagonist, Kim looked like a cute bear cub. Eugene noticed that Kim now looks not like a predator, but a meek puppy. The main character looked like an angry rabbit, baring his teeth. Eugene angrily asked Kim what he was trying to do. Kim frowned, looking seriously at the main character. Eugene angrily poked his finger at Kim's chest. The protagonist sarcastically asked Kim he really didn't know the laws of the Republic of Korea, noting that every person has the right to freedom, and locking him up like that is a crime. Kim could not restrain himself and grabbed Eugene by the collar of his jacket. The protagonist told Kim that he would go to jail, mentioning the policeman. Kim held the protagonist by the collar, lifting him up. Eugene looked ahead dejectedly. With his hands down, Kim told the main character that this was a punishment and sarcastically asked if he wanted him to continue dragging him to the room. Eugene apologized to Kim, answering him negatively. The protagonist looked depressed, thinking that with or without skill, no matter how hard the frog pouts, he won't become an ox. A red icon depicting a twig with leaves appeared before the eyes of the main character. Eugene noticed this skill without understanding what it was. A system window appears. A promising cutting is activated. The protagonist suddenly grabbed Kim by the face, pulling him closer. Eugene looked at Kim's surprised face. The main character saw information about Kim and his skill's possible awakening level at unwavering body. Acquisition failed. Regeneration. Acquisition failed. Expanse shield. The protagonist was surprised that Kim could awaken his S-class. The main character introduced Kim and Hyun with their backs to each other. The main character thought that then there could be two S-class hunters in the abyss. Eugene began to pull Kim's ears and hair, staring intently at his face. The main character thought that maybe he could change this with his skill. The protagonist closed his eyes, knitting his eyebrows. System notification nurturing an object in a state of incompleteness after using the code word. You can use my baby. The best and get the S-class skills that you failed to obtain. Eugene was glad that he could change this after all. The protagonist imagined Kim calmly releasing him. The main character thought that he had found a solution to the problem in education, and that if he obediently raised Kim, he would obediently obey him. Eugene added that he would find himself an S-class and regain his freedom. The protagonist looked at Kim excitedly, pursing his lips. The main character thought that for education, it is necessary to say a code word, and that he should tell Kim that he loves. Kim furrowed his brows with rage as the veins popped out on his face. Kim didn't understand what Eugene was doing. The main character pointed decisively with his hand at himself, knitting his eyebrows. The protagonist asked Kim to look where his hand was pointing. Eugene raised his hand and with a confused smile, showed him a heart by folding two fingers. Kim looked gloomily and made a gesture that the main character showed. The protagonist awkwardly winked at Kim and showed his heart by folding his fingers. Kim became gloomy at the actions of the main character and looked at him angrily. Kim told Eugene to stop making those nasty gestures and go back to his room. The main character fell to his knees with a drooping look. Resting his hands on the floor, the protagonist really wanted the code word to be changed. It was night outside. Hyun returned home, looking at his older brother with a relaxed expression. The protagonist was lying on the floor, looking exhausted. Hyun asked Eugene if he had a good rest. The main character sarcastically answered his younger brother that he was dying. He told Eugene that the abyss has many enemies holding it back, but if they become the strongest, even they will not be able to touch them lightly, noting that then he too will be able to go out calmly. The protagonist imagined himself wearing a collar with a leash, which was held by a happy Hyun. The main character thought it looked like walking the dog. Suddenly, it dawned on the protagonist, causing his eyes to widen. He thought he could pull off something similar with his abilities. The main character recalled how he sat in front of the TV, looking at the hunters. Eugene thought that back then, he spent days searching for hunter-related information and clearly remembered who would become a high-level hunter in the future. The protagonist imagined a lot of falling papers. He thought that if he found them in advance and appeased them, he could awaken them, and as payment for awakening, he would make them his guards. The main character imagined himself in a circle of powerful and cool hunters. He thought that if he became more authoritative this way, then Hyun would also not be able to do whatever he wanted. Eugene noted that with his skills and rank, this is quite possible. Hyun turned his thoughtful gaze to his older brother. The main character jumped up and smiled joyfully, pressing his hand to his chest. Eugene happily told his younger brother that he could find in a class hunter. Hyun looked at his brother in surprise and shock. Eugene knitted his eyebrows and smiled maliciously, clenching his hand into a fist. He thought he would dig up future as classes. Night hung over the city. Lanterns glowed on the streets. Eugene thought that since everything turned out this way, he would have to find small children who were easy to convince. Jaram stood in tattered and worn-out sneakers. She raised her head and fixed her gaze on the dark sky. The main character thought that he would carefully appease and raise him as a personal hunter. Hyun was surprised that Eugene wanted to find a class. The main character looked at his younger brother with enthusiasm. Holding out his hand, the protagonist asked Hyun to allow him to move freely if he found in a class personal bodyguard. Hyun looked at his brother in confusion, smiling awkwardly. Hyun wondered how his older brother would find a bodyguard. Hyun looked intently at his older brother. Waiting for an answer, Hyun told his younger brother that he has different ways. Hyun narrowed his gaze and lowered his eyebrows, looking at the main character seriously. Hyun assumed that Hyun had awakened. The main character imagined how he was shackled and his mouth taped, with Kim standing next to him with a whip in his hands. Eugene thought that he couldn't tell the truth about the L-class skill, otherwise he would be imprisoned forever. Hyun closed his eyes and raised his hand to his chin. He told the main character that with this, he would not become a target. The main character looked at his younger brother with a blank expression. Holding his hand, Hyun told the protagonist that an alternative awakening center would soon appear, noting that the entire awakening mechanism had been revealed. Eugene thoughtfully scratched his cheek. Looking away to the side, the main character remembered that the center had not yet appeared at that time. The main character smiled lightly. Eugene told his younger brother that everything worked out well then. The main character smiled happily from ear to ear. Eugene told Hyun that his skill was useless, so he had nothing to worry about, adding that he would find an upgrade if he gave it a chance. The main character smiled insidiously. Knitting his eyebrows, he thought that his brother would not be able to keep him locked up according to his wishes and would sweep away everyone from a 2S class. Eugene imagined S-class hunters holding him in their arms. The protagonist thought that he would quickly find them and increase his power, and thus he could even found a guild more serious than the Abyss. The sun was shining brightly above the building. The next day, Hunters Association of South Korea, place of registration of the awakened. The hunters opened their mouths wide in surprise, noticing that an Abyss shield, Hunter Kim, had appeared in the building. Kim looked around with a serious expression on his face. Eugene trailed behind Kim with his head down. The hunters in the building were staring at the main character, chatting among themselves. The hunters were surprised that Kim was assigned as a guard to the protagonist, thinking that he would become the new S-class. On the paper, one could see information about the main character and that he was registered as an F-class hunter. Eugene held an envelope with money in his hand, imagining the image of his younger brother handing him the envelope. The main character opened the envelope and widened his eyes at what he saw. The check said 1 billion won. The sign said Floor 6 Fahrenheit Hunter Shopping Center. The sellers greeted the main character generously, and with wide smiles a girl with her hair tied up greeted the protagonist, asking him what equipment he wanted to start with. The protagonist was shown a box with small black earrings. The saleswoman said that they could offer him this as a simple accessory. Dark elf earrings. Mana plus 29 Fusion put earrings on his ears, pursing his lips. The main character took gloves and a belt, putting it all on himself. Manticore leather gloves, stamina plus 6, strength plus 20 white cloth belt, agility plus 16. The protagonist opened the system window, thinking that his abilities would be C-class. The main character was looking around the store windows. Eugene said that he would take the contract and potions with the remaining money. Kim stood by the car with a menacing face, his hands folded on his chest. Kim asked the main character where he went. Eugene sat in the back seat of the car, fastening his seatbelt. Eugene told Kim that he was out shopping. Kim sternly told the main character to let him know when he was going somewhere, and added that if he had nothing else to do, then they would come back. The car slowly began to move. The main character told Kim that he needed to go to one more place. Eugene sat by the window, resting his head on his hand, and looked thoughtfully out the window. He thought that the ice, which Jaram definitely lived somewhere in the area, noting that she had lost her parents and lived with relatives who owned a meat restaurant. The main character presented the image of Jaram, holding a spear around which ice was formed. Eugene recalled that Jaram was an excellent hunter even among the A-class, so this level should have satisfied Yu Yeon, noting that she would have to awaken in 3 years when she turned 18. The city at night was illuminated by the light of street lamps. The protagonist thought that he needed to quickly find her and enter into a contract with her in order to regain his freedom. A crowd of people was walking in the market. The woman with the black bag looked at the main character in surprise. She told him that she didn't know any Jaram. The man in the mustard scarf shook his head negatively. He told the main character that they don't have Jaram in their restaurant. Eugene looked around, holding a snack in his hand. Kim walked with a menacing look. Looking straight ahead, the main character noticed that there were more meat restaurants than he expected, and he would have to go around them all. The protagonist felt a delicious smell and closed his eyes. Sniffing with pleasure, he noticed that it was the smell of roasting meat. The market was hung with garlands and signs. Eugene asked Kim if he was hungry, suggesting they eat first. Kim replied to the main character that he was fine. The main character chewed his snack carefully. Looking at Kim, Kim asked the protagonist why they came there. Since there is a meat restaurant next to the abyss, Eugene told Kim that he felt a strong energy there. Kim furrowed his eyebrows. Looking away in disbelief, Kim muttered under his breath that this was a complete scam. The main character closed his eyes, about to take a bite of his snack in his hands. An angry Jaram stood nearby. The protagonist thought that first he needed to have dinner and then continue his search. Noticing that he wanted to eat kopchen, Jaram screamed furiously that it always her fault. The main character looked at Jam in surprise, his eyes widening. Jaram furrowed her eyebrows and opened her mouth wide. Jaram told her uncle that it was all because of that man Park Soo-koon's. An angry man looked out from the restaurant. Jaram took off her apron and turned her back to the man. Running away from him, the man told Jaram in a commanding tone to come back. Jaram shouted in rage that she hated everything and it would be easier to die. Jaram with a downcast look ran past the main character, who looked at her in bewilderment. The protagonist opened his mouth slightly, recognizing the girl. He thought that he had finally found Jaram. Jaram frowned and clenched her teeth, running wherever her eyes were looking. Eugene will extend his hand after the fleeing Jaram. The main character handed his snack to Kim and with a serious look looked in the direction where Jaram ran away. Kim looked at Eugene in bewilderment. The main character asked Kim to hold his snack for a while. The protagonist followed Jaram. Knitting his eyebrows, he thought that Jaram was very fast for someone who was not awakened. A bright blue light began to emanate from Eugene's feet. The main character had to use a B-class item, a light fabric belt, agility plus 16. The protagonist accelerated, emitting blue light from his feet, and ran after Jaram. Eugene noticed that with his equipment, high speed is nonsense for him. The main character ran past people, raising a strong wind. He thought the equipment was the best thing in the world. Many people were walking around the market. Eugene ran, looking at Jaram in the crowd. The main character saw Jaram running away. Jaram turned around, looking at the main character in surprise. The protagonist called out to her, asking if she was Jaram's student. Eugene ran closer and closer to Jaram. His mouth wide open. The main character wanted to talk to the student. Jaram thought that her uncle had sent it. Jaram moved from her place, running out onto the roadway. She called the protagonist uncle, telling him to leave as she had no intention of coming back. Eugene didn't like that she called him uncle, noting that he was in the prime of his life. The main character opened his eyes wide. Looking at Jaram with concern, the protagonist noticed that there was a car on the road. The car was shining its headlights brightly as it approached Jaram. Jaram was numb with horror. Her eyes widening, a blue burst of energy appeared. The main character released blue energy, bounced off the car, and grabbed Jaram. The main character collapsed to the ground, along with Jaram. The driver of the car widened his eyes in fear. A crowd of people watched with shocked faces. Jaram looked at the main character in confusion, her mouth slightly open. Eugene asked her if she was okay. The protagonist looked at Jaram with relief. Smiling slightly, the main character told Jaram that he wanted the ending to be cooler. Jaram sat on the back of the main character, resting her foot on his face. Jaram noticed that the main character was a hunter. Eugene invited the student to get up from his back. There was a grill on the table on which meat was being fried. The main character closed his eyes and smiled joyfully. Drooling, Eugene said that the texture of the meat was simply killer, noting that he had not eaten marbled beef for a long time. Jaram held a green pepper in her hand, dipping it into the sauce. She noticed that the main character called himself the elder brother of the head of the abyss. Jaram looked intently at the main character, biting the pepper. She didn't understand why such a person needed her. Eugene closed his eyes, raised his hands to his chin, and smiled widely. He jokingly told Jaram that it was because good energy emanated from her. Jaram turned around sharply and was about to get up from the table. Jaram thanked the main character for the food, saying that she didn't believe it at all. The protagonist looked away, smiling awkwardly, imagining himself with his little brother and a man with a woman. He told Jaram that he knew her parents, adding that when his parents passed away, they helped him. The main character noticed in his head that this was a lie. The main character picked up the fried meat with tongs. The protagonist told Jaram that he was thinking about how he could help her, noting that his strength turned out to be outstanding. Eugene looked at the student with a slight smile. Raising his hand to his chest, he told her that his ability was to awaken other people. Jaram held a bowl of food in her hands and looked at the main character in surprise. The protagonist told Jaram that she can awake and at least be class. There were 2 black cards on the table. Eugene told Jaram that he was under the protection of the abyss, so he could help her get a good job as a huntress. The main character looked at Jaram with hope. Crossing his fingers, Eugene told Jaram that he wants to sponsor her if she doesn't mind. The protagonist extended his hand with a friendly smile. Jaram looked at the main character with confusion. Eugene asked the student if she would become a huntress by entering into a contract with him. Jaram widened her eyes in shock, raising her eyebrows. The main character watched Jaram with interest. He thought that Jaram was hooked since hunting was considered the coolest profession among teenagers, adding that he needed to put on a show to lure her in. The main character raised his hand and opened his inventory. Eugene took out a shining scroll with a feather from his inventory. The protagonist suggested to Jaram that she read the contract. A shining contract flew up to Jaram's face. Eugene told the student that all she had to do was officially sign a contract as the huntress Jaram. Jaram looked at the contract with delight, blushing slightly. There were hieroglyphs inscribed on the contract. Jaram read the conditions, which included entering into a contract with the Abyss Guild, keeping Eugene's skill a secret, and being responsible for guarding Eugene for a year. The protagonist leaned his hand on the table and smiled awkwardly from ear to ear. The main character told Jaram that he would not be ashamed, because after awakening she would be much stronger than him. Jaram asked Eugene if she could become independent after awakening. Jaram lowered her head, looking sadly at the contract. The main character suddenly grabbed his pen. Eugene asked Jaram to wait. Jaram didn't understand what to expect, thinking that just writing the name was enough. Eugene told Jaram that everything needs to be checked carefully, adding that the contract doesn't even have her terms. Jaram looked at the contract in confusion, her mouth slightly open. The main character moved closer to Jaram, pointing his finger at the contract. Eugene warned Jaram what would happen if she was deceived when signing rashly. The main character looked questioningly at the student. Raising his eyebrows, the protagonist added that even if independence looks alluring, you need to be careful. Jaram asked what to do then if this guardian is deceiving her. Eugene looked at Jaram blankly. Jaram narrowed her eyes slightly, frowning. The student did not understand the point of a guardian deceiving her and monitoring the fulfillment of the contract, noting that everything would simply be taken away from her. Jaram kept her hands on her knees, clutching her clothes tightly. The main character did not understand what the student was talking about. The guys looked excitedly in the direction where the source of the noise appeared. The student's uncle searched everywhere for her, shouting her name. An angry Uncle Jaram appeared at the establishment. The uncle told the student that he had been told where she was. The guys quickly got up from the table. The main character greeted Uncle Jaram appeared at the establishment. The uncle told the student that he had been told where she was. Uncle told Jaram that she was not doing what she was told, but was chilling somewhere. The uncle furiously frowned on his face and grabbed Jaram's hand. The uncle told Jaram in a commanding tone to follow him, adding that he would correct her habits. The main character asked Uncle Jaram to calm down. Eugene grabbed his uncle's hand tightly. The uncle directed his furious gaze at the protagonist. The main character looked at his uncle in shock. Jaram's uncle asked Eugene who he was and how close he was to Jaram. The protagonist told his uncle that there was nothing like that between them. The main character held his uncle's hand, baring his teeth. The uncle did not understand where the main character got such strength. Eugene thought it was all thanks to his equipment. The uncle contorted his face with rage. Eugene turned his gaze to Jaram. The student's uncle asked the protagonist to let go of his hand and displeasantly asked him who he thought he was interfering in their affairs. Eugene raised his eyebrows and looked at Jaram in surprise. Jaram stood slightly cowed, looking away to the side. The main character noticed the worn-out and old sneakers on the student's feet. Eugene remembered how he saw Jaram and his uncle quarrel outside the establishment. The main character opened his mouth slightly. Eugene told Jaram that now he understood what she was talking about. The protagonist looked angrily at the student's uncle, squeezing his hand harder. Eugene told Jaram that she meant that nothing is better than such a guardian. Jaram furrowed her eyebrows and opened her mouth wide. Jaram told the main character that he is absolutely right and her uncle is the worst. Jaram pointed her finger at her uncle. The main character narrowed his eyes and glared at him, causing him to hesitate. Jaram told the protagonist that her uncle stole her parents' entire inheritance and did not give her a penny of pocket money. Uncle Jaram frowned with anger and bared his teeth. He told the student that she was always disgracing people. The student's uncle walked towards Jaram, throwing the main character aside. Eugene suddenly fell to the floor. Jaram and uncle widened their eyes as they looked at Eugene. Jaram looked at the main character excitedly. Her mouth parted. Uncle Jaram knitted his eyebrows, looking at Eugene in bewilderment. The protagonist sat on the cold floor with his head down. Jaram asked Eugene if he was okay. The main character rolled on the floor in horror, his mouth wide open. Eugene shouted to the entire establishment that Uncle Jaram was beating people. The protagonist sat on the floor, closing his eyes, pressing his hand to his chest. Eugene told his uncle that he could talk normally and not push people. Noting that he just stopped the student, the main character looked at Uncle Jaram with a pitiful look, letting tears flow from his eyes. The uncle grabbed the main character by the clothes, pulling him slightly towards him. The protagonist looked down with a serious look. Eugene tripped up the student's uncle. Uncle flew onto the table, sweeping plates off it. The main character rose to his feet and held a can of soda in his hands. With a smile, the protagonist told his uncle to be careful because the soda had spilled and the floor was now slippery. The uncle raised his head and looked furiously at the main character. Eugene grabbed his uncle's head, pressing it to the table. Jaram knitted her eyebrows and watched what was happening with a smile. Barely holding back her laughter, the main character asked his uncle if he was okay because he slipped again. The protagonist held his uncle's head over the hot grill and leaned slightly towards him. Eugene asked his uncle how he dared to steal from a small child, threatening him with violence. The main character looked at his uncle angrily. Eugene warned the student's uncle not to dare treat Jaram like hell again. The main character turned his head to the side and saw Jaram smiling joyfully. The student noticed that this hit on the table. The sound was just like in wrestling. Eugene told Jaram that the sound was not from him, noting that he heard it from the street. The guys looked at the street in surprise, their mouths slightly open. The restaurant building began to shake violently. People in the building thought that an earthquake or war had started. Kim ran into the restaurant in a panic. Kim called out to the main character at the top of his lungs. People opened their mouths in horror at what they saw. Kim told all people to evacuate carefully. A huge black monster with worm-shaped eyes was destroying buildings. People in panic tried to escape from the terrible monster. Kim said that there was a dungeon break nearby. The guys looked at Kim in shock, their mouths agape. Kim told the guys to move away because it was dangerous there. Kim stood in a fighting position, clenching his hand into a fist, and a golden icon with a shield and a mountain appeared in front of his hand. Kim told the guys that he would stop him. Kim hit the ground with all his might, stopping the huge monster. System notification defense skill, a class shield of space. A wall of earth appeared in front of the monster, blocking its path. Kim watched the monster. The main character watched in horror. What was happening? Kim told the protagonist to take the chance and evacuate quickly. The main character watched the monster. With confusion, Eugene thought that there was no such thing in his memories, and why did the monster suddenly appear? The main character was in a daze. Kim sat on his haunches, looking towards the monster with a serious look. The protagonist recalled that in the past, at the same time, there was no dungeon breakout. Kim jumped off the ground and rushed at the monster. Kim flew into the air, swinging his leg at the monster. Kim kicked the monster with all his might, releasing a golden burst of energy. Kim rested his foot on the monster's body. Kim frowned. Looking at the monster with bewilderment, Kim noticed that the monster had no base. The monster began to attack Kim with its tentacles. Kim jumped over the wall, dodging the blows. The monster followed Kim and began to climb over. People ran away from the wall in panic. Jaram ran, turning back in panic. The uncle ran away from the wall in horror, not understanding what was happening. The laces on the sneakers came undone, and Jaram stepped on the lace. The student fell to the ground. The uncle looked at Jaram and ran on. The student looked in front of her with displeasure, baring her teeth. The monster's tentacles were approaching Jaram. Jaram closed her eyes and opened her mouth slightly. The main character covered Jaram with a shield, preventing the tentacles from passing through. The student widened her eyes in surprise, looking at the protagonist. Eugene bared his teeth while holding a huge shield in his hand, from which a bright light emanated. The protagonist looked at Jaram with a serious look. The main character told the student to quickly run to the shelter. Eugene grabbed Jaram's hand and rushed with her, running away from the monster. Jaram slightly opened her mouth and looked at the back of the main character in confusion. The student knitted her eyebrows and looked down sadly. An entrance to the ground appeared in front of the guys. The main character asked Jaram if the hideout was located there. In the underground shopping center, Jaram told the main character that everything was correct. The protagonist turned behind him, looking at Jaram. Eugene told Jaram to quickly go down there. The protagonist narrowed his gaze and frowned at the student. Eugene told Jaram that he needs to go back. The main character recalled hunters attacking the same monster. The protagonist thought that he had seen this type of monster, and alone they are weak, so they move in a pack, noting that if they are not quickly gotten rid of, they become a complete headache. Kim formed a golden shield in front of him. Kim defended himself from the monster's furious blows. The main character thought that since Kim specializes in defense, he does not have a separate skill for area attack, adding that with such an opponent is the least suitable specialization. The protagonist nervously looked ahead. Frowning, Eugene thought that he needed to find a way to defeat the monster at all costs. Jaram grabbed the protagonist's hand. She told the main character that she would also go and asked him to wake her up, noting that she could go fight. Jaram was full of confidence and looked at the main character intently. The student widened her eyes in shock, pursing her lips. Eugene told Jaram that this is precisely why she is not allowed to, since she is still a child. The protagonist approached the student and put his hands on her shoulders. He told Jaram that she would not fight skillfully once she awakened, adding that he wanted to awaken her calmly and painlessly, and did not intend to immediately throw her into real combat. Eugene remembered his little brother when he awakened and had to fight monsters. Eugene told Jaram that he could calmly watch the child be forced to fight alone. The protagonist turned around and looked at the student one last time. Eugene told Jaram that adults should deal with this and she should get to the shelter safe and sound. Jaram watched as the main character ran towards the monster. The protagonist rushed headlong. Baring his teeth, Eugene tried to think of a way to help defeat the monster. The main character knitted his eyebrows, looking in the direction of the monster. With irritation, Eugene thought that he had been hanging around as a hunter for more than 5 years, and even in this state, he could squeeze some kind of decision out of himself. The protagonist ran up to Kim. Kim turned behind him, looking at the main character in surprise. Kim looked at the main character with displeasure. Kim didn't understand why Eugene came and told him that it was dangerous there. The main character told Kim to use the defense skill. The monster's tentacles peeked out from behind the wall. Kim told the main character that this was useless, and even with a protective barrier, it would not be possible to completely enclose the center. The main character knitted his eyebrows and looked at Kim with all confidence. The protagonist told Kim that this skill would be enough since he had an idea. Kim widened his eyes in surprise, looking at Eugene. The men stand on a rock and look down at the monster. One man makes a vague movement with his hands as his companion holds his palms on the rocky surface. The man raises his hand to strike when a golden glow appears around it. This moment attacks the ground when the yellow seal becomes larger. This hit deals damage to some terrible substance. This monster is in a rage. A large crack appears in the ground. A man sits while his companion stands, and a green seal appears under his foot. One person argues that such a situation is unexpected. Eugene claims that he is already heading in some direction. The guy pushes away from an emerald-colored spot. He deftly jumps on the rocky surface. Eugene touches the stone with his fingers while performing the trick. He thinks that the protective barrier is like a solid wall, and if you put it around the monster, it will become such a cage for him. The woman shows some paraphernalia in the suitcase when the guy looks at them carefully and puts his hand to his chin. He thinks about the item that was purchased from the hunting association. Green granules are in a box. He adds that it is a class of deadly poison, namely the limitless black poison pill. A man holds an emerald ball in his hand. He thinks that his purchase is quite good. The guy with the short hair is getting ready to throw that pill forward. He reasons that if he blows up this device inside the barrier and closes it, this will mean his victory. Eugene opens his eyes wide in surprise. He says that with a detailed situation, he will be able to kill the monster instantly. Empty gorge of a large mountain. Eugene is surprised that the monster is missing. He opens his mouth and gets nervous when the monster appears behind him. The guy asks himself where his opponent disappeared to. Dark tentacles envelop a man's leg. The monster suddenly lifts Eugene into the air. A guy with short, smooth hair becomes more gloomy. He thinks that the monster got out through the drain. Someone strikes with an umbrella. Eugene remembers that there was no such information, so he didn't think about it, and then wonders if this is the end of him. Jaram opens his mouth wide and holds an umbrella in his hands. The girl calls her uncle. She deals multiple attacks to the monster that is holding Eugene. The monster lets go of the guy's leg. He lands on his feet and runs after Jaram. The girl turns to her uncle, asks him to run, and warns him that there is an alley in a certain direction. A guy with short cocoa-colored hair quickly runs with Jaram from their opponent. He asks his comrade what she is doing here. He ordered all civilians to evacuate. The girl asks her uncle what he is doing, if he is a representative of Class F. The tentacles of the monster are heading after the heroes. Eugene claims that he is an adult and awakened. Jaram warns his interlocutor not to make her laugh. She asks if this is the person who asked the student of the neighboring school for protection. The guy looks at the girl, who opens her mouth wide and closes her eyes. He claims that he already warned Jaram that she was still quite small. She says that she knows about this, which is why she needs even more strength. A girl with an interesting hair color looks forward sadly. Jaram and Eugene hold hands and run in a certain direction. She argues that when her uncle slept with her recently, the girl was able to calm down because she assumed that her new acquaintance really wanted to protect her. The schoolgirl looks down sadly. She thinks that such behavior could anger her. The heroes run in a certain direction. The girl explains that she does not have the strength to protect herself on her own. Buildings on the street in the city. She claims that this is the reason the girl wants to become stronger. A little girl looks in an unknown direction. She explains that she previously did not have the opportunity to do anything because of her age. An unknown person runs in the rain. People are running away from the child. Ira adds that she doesn't want to wait for help while she's worried. Someone is running fast enough. The girl claims that she wants power that she can choose on her own, with which she can protect herself. She frowns and looks ahead resolutely. A girl with an unusual color of curls turns to her uncle and reminds him of his own words. A guy with short, smooth hair looks down in surprise. Jaram claims that she has such a power that can make a girl more powerful. She and Eugene run forward from their opponent. The student asks her friend to show her how much stronger she can become. The heroes raise their heads and are quite surprised. They shake hands when a blue glow appears around them. A bright flash of light appears. The man is holding a weapon in his hand. He asks how a situation like this could end this way. The man opens his eyes quite strongly in surprise. Something approaches the girl's hand, over which a blue seal appears. A school student smiles happily as she holds her palms above her head. The world system notifies that Jaram has activated a skill called Icy Breath, and the girl has completed her registration. She calls her uncle and notifies him that she has received an S rank. The short-haired man looks ahead. Dumbfounded, Jaram claims that she has developed some cool skills. Her friend claims that no one speaks loudly about their skills. The monster pulls its limbs upward. Eri asks how her uncle feels about her new opportunities. A girl with an unusual color of curls looks forward. When a monster appears behind her, the guy warns his partner about the appearance of a monster. The enemy's tentacles wrap around the wrist of a school student. Her uncle tries to warn her that she needs to be careful. The men watch as their comrade gets scared and hits the wall. Her colleagues are in shock. The girl looks in surprise at the monster she slammed into the rocky surface. Eugene thinks that this kind of power is common for S-class. Jaram clenches his hands into fists and smiles happily. She assures that she will cope further on her own. A schoolgirl approaches a tall man and stretches out her hands to a certain staff. She asks her friend to lend her a weapon. He agrees with trepidation. The end of the staff rests on the ground as a blue glow appears around it. A pillar of light appears as Jaram delivers the killing blow. A man creates yellow shields to protect himself and his friend from rocks. Eugene asks for help. A blue stamp appears under the girl's feet. The game system notifies that the Hermes shoes skill is about to be activated. There is a flash of bright light due to Jaram's powerful attack. A man protects his friend from falling rocks as he raises his hand into the air. Eugene loudly calls the girl's name and urges her to be more careful, since in this case, they will be crushed to death. A guy with short, smooth hair looks with displeasure at a school student who is floating in the air. Jaram apologizes and explains that she still doesn't have good control over her power. Eugene puts his hand to his forehead and smiles with pleasure. Some man extends his hand forward and looks ahead gloomily. The guy talks about how, as a hunter, this person was called an ice witch. The girl grins happily and closes her eyes. Eugene thinks that his new friend turned out to be a child who is capable of a sincere smile. The guy with short hair raises his head up. He says that he could not expect the girl to awaken so unexpectedly, and adds that it would be great if she had the opportunity to launch an attack over a large area. Another man claims that his partner can leave something like this for him. Someone extends their hand forward as a burgundy aura appears around it. A certain person is preparing for a powerful attack when Eugene and his friend are watching him. Eugene looks ahead resolutely. Someone calls this person by name. A schoolgirl watches her companion's deadly attack. She opens her eyes wide in surprise. The monster's body is burning. The girl is surprised that the guy was able to burn the enemy with his first attack. The guy raises his hand and sends fiery blows upward. The man frowns and looks ahead resolutely. The schoolgirl looks down with admiration. The guy is standing on the ground among the rubble and stones. He looks with interest at the girl with the unusual color of her curls. Eugene looks at the gloomy Eugene. He calls his friend by name and is glad that he came. The guy turns his head to the side. Jaram sinks to the ground and watches as the guy in the raincoat scolds Eugene. He asks him he knows how worried Eugene was when his friend called him on the way to the scene of the tragedy, and then mutters something about how many times he needs to be reminded not to be outside at such moments. Eugene points his hand forward, and the men turn their heads in the right direction. The guy with the short, sleek hair claims that everything is fine, and his friend doesn't need to worry so much. Eugene points to Jaram. The guy claims that he has found a person whose S-class has recently awakened. A girl with an unusual color of curls awkwardly greets the new person. She is embarrassed. The girl thinks that this man's eyes really look like abysses. The guy puts his finger to his face and is quite nervous. He mutters something incomprehensible. Eugene is in a state of shock and horror. Eugene says that he wanted to become her guardian. The friends argue and wave their arms as Jaram gives the weapon to another man. Eugene asks if the person across from him really wants to become a trustee rather than a sponsor. A girl with an unusual color of curls thanks for the staff that was lent to her and asks how these concepts differ. The man moves his eyebrows towards the bridge of his nose. He claims that a simple sponsor cannot interfere in the affairs of his ward, for which reason he would not be able to protect him in any way. The girl opens her eyes and mouth. Her friend argues that the caregiver can do things that the sponsor is not allowed to do, and is the one who plays the role of the parent. Jaram asks his interlocutor again. Eugene becomes darker and more angry. The girl is trying to say something. He pulls his friend away from the surprised Jaram. The guy in the cloak claims that he cannot allow such a situation to occur to ensure Eugene's safety. The guy in the cloak points his finger forward. He wonders if there could be a situation where this girl attacks Eugene. Jaram grits her teeth and becomes more gloomy. She claims to be a kind person. Eugene gets angry and opens his mouth wide. He says that he would rather become a trustee of this school student. A girl with an unusual color of curls frowns. She counters that she doesn't want this since her uncle promised her that he would do it. Eugene tries to calm his friends down. Eugene tries to take his friend home. He claims there is nothing negotiable here. The girl grabs Eugene's hand. She asks where Eugene is taking her savior, and then claims that this man cannot interfere with their agreement. A guy with short hair becomes more gloomy due to severe shoulder pain. Eugene and Jaram fuss over their friend. The guy in the raincoat calls Eugene's name and asks if he's okay. A girl with an unusual hair color panics. The patient asks the two archers to move away from him. Eugene points his finger at the man in the cloak. Eugene asks his friend if he needs to drink a healing potion. A guy with short, smooth hair tilts his head down. He asks the tall man if he really raised him this way. Eugene presses his finger into his friend's chest, gets angry, and opens his mouth. He claims that choosing a trustee is Jaram's right, while he should rejoice as the head of the guild that a person of S rank has joined. Eugene tries to object to his comrade. Eugene looks ahead dumbfounded. He assures that they will definitely talk later, and he will quickly finish work and return. The girl with an unusual hair color folds her arms across her chest, while the guy rests his palms on his hips. The school student is nervous and looks at her new guardian. She apologizes, explains that she currently has control over her power, and then asks what condition Eugene's shoulder is, and he claims that this is an ordinary slight dislocation. The guy picks up his sneaker from the ground. He says that these are Jaram's shoes, but since she cannot control her power, he puts them on. Eugene looks down and puts the shoe on the school student's foot. He claims that she is quite old and the wrong size for a girl, and then curses at the student's uncle. A girl with an unusual color of curls looks forward with excitement. Eugene warns that tomorrow they will definitely go and buy Jaram new shoes. The girl smiles happily when the guy with short, smooth hair looks down with concentration. The school student laughs and says that such an attitude makes her tremble. Eugene can't understand what his ward is talking about. The girl suddenly notices a fly. She tries to explain that this kind of feeling is usually depicted in dramas. A school student tries to kill a midge, but injures Eugene. She mutters something about insects. Blood appears on the face of a guy with short hair. The girl raises her hands up, and her new guardian grabs his chest. He claims that this is not trepidation, but that his heart will soon break. Jaram apologizes and assures that she will be more careful. The starry sky is above the city. Eugene claims that he cares. He ties his sneakers. The guy reminds his interlocutor that she recently asked him why he commits such actions. He closes his eyes and smiles. He says that he does this because the story of this girl does not seem alien to him due to the fact that his parents died when he was little. The boys hug each other tightly. Eugene states that he sometimes thinks about how things would have been different if they had had a strong base back then. The girl looks down with interest. Her new guardian says he understands that he may not appear reliable enough. The school student opens her mouth. She assures that Eugene is a reliable person. She smiles widely and clenches her hand into a fist. Eugene grins and extends his palm forward. He also asks you to take good care of him. The fists of these people touch. The guy looks up with excitement. He claims that, of course, this can never compare with the love of parents. The girl looks down in surprise. The guy counters that he loves Jaram. A high school student raises her hand to her chest and laughs loudly. She asks why her new guardian said that. The world system notifies that the girl who recently awakened her ankh has received a positive effect from the code word. The girl's uncle runs in a certain direction. He calls his niece by name, namely Jaram. He looks at a girl with an unusual color of curls and her new guardian. This man claims that he was afraid for his ward because he could not find her for a long time. Uncle is nervous and smiles wryly. He asks his niece if she has truly awakened. Eugene and Jaram become more gloomy. The girl's relative claims that people with high ranks earn a lot of money. A guy with short, smooth hair thinks that they still have a detailed problem. The guardian ran up to those standing and spread his hands, saying that he was very worried when he lost the girl. Jaram sighed, turning away when she heard the words that it's not about that now, that she woke up. Is it true? The man beamed with joy when the girl told him her class, saying that now a mountain of money awaits them. Eugene coughed into his fist, and Jaram turned to him and said that she was leaving the house because she now had a contract with him, to which the guardian asked again in surprise. Frowning and steaming with anger, he shouted, asking why a 16-year-old girl would leave the house. To this the girl replied that she was 15. Eugene intervened. He approached the man and said that according to a special law, a hunter can become independent from the age of 14. The man looked at the smartphone the guy held out and angrily yelled that he was hearing about the special law for the first time. Let him stop talking nonsense. Eugene looked at him seriously, holding out a smartphone with a voice recorder recording that voiced the words of their recent dialogue. Phrases were heard from the phone that we could talk normally. Why was he pushing him? The man was going to hit her like that, a weak high school student. The guardian, stuttering, asked what it was. The guy showed the recording to the amazed man, saying that he would still get recordings from CCTV cameras, and Jaram was surprised that he was recording everything from the very beginning. The girl listened as they argued. Eugene said that the fact that he was a bad guardian had become clear a long time ago, and recently he completely abandoned this child, running away, to which the man shouted, asking when did this happen. Swift movement flashed past the smartphone. The man grabbed the brunette by the clothes and shouted, calling him names and saying that he had planned this from the very beginning. Eugene frowned, silently looking at the man who was yelling that he would sue him. Jaram raised the blue umbrella she was holding in her hands. With force, she lowered the umbrella into the ground between the surprised debaters, and from the impact of the umbrella, bright blue rays of light flew in all directions. From the impact of the umbrella, the ground cracked and smoke. The guardian asked in surprise what it was. The girl, clutching an umbrella with both hands, listened as he stammered and said that the awakened should not harm ordinary people. Jaram raised her shining eyes to him and looked with the most innocent look. Beaming, she innocently asked what he was talking about, what to do if he constantly let go of his hands. The man asked again what she was talking about and, turning to Eugene, said that he, too, saw that she hit her like that on purpose. With a slight movement, the girl broke the umbrella in half along with the fabric and knitting needles. The guardian looked at this in fear, hiccuping with fear. With a sweet and wide smile, the girl charmingly asked, "What is Uncle talking about?" She approached the startled man like a red cloud, clutching a broken umbrella, and asked if he pushed the guy, and then just fell, didn't he? Sweating with fear, the man thought, is this really the high school student he saw every day at home? The hair of the furiously burning girl was flying, her eyes were burning, and the umbrella in her hands was crumpled into a ball. The guardian thought that he was standing in front of some kind of predator. Eugene scratched his neck thoughtfully, activating his fear resistance ability, and thought that this intimidating aura showed that she was definitely S rank. Feet in worn-out sneakers slowly walked towards the man. The girl said that he himself should know that he was not in a position for her to be grateful to him. The enraged girl squeezed the umbrella, crumpled into a ball, tighter in her hands. The man fell to the ground in fear, and Jaram threw a lump of umbrella and said that guardian, this word is funny. He didn't even buy her a pathetic umbrella. The man looked in fear at the remains of the umbrella lying nearby, and the girl continued, saying that if she had her way, she would have turned it into this. He hiccuped in fear when the girl grabbed his shirt, saying that now she would just turn a blind eye to this. Did he know why? Approaching the man's face, Jaram said that it was because he was worthless. The man was not worth even an ounce of her attention. She looked at him menacingly. Towering menacingly over her frightened guardian, the girl advised him to remember this and continue to live his worthless life, and if he does not follow her advice and continues to cling to her or make a row with Eugene, attracting attention to himself. The girl menacingly placed her hands on and declared that then she would definitely not turn a blind eye to. Startled man sitting on the ground screamed loudly. Jaram enthusiastically raised her fist in the air, asking, well, did she repeat after the guy? It was impossible to take a sip of cold water in front of the children. A bad example was contagious. The morning sun was rising over the city. The guy remembered that this is how Jaram became a member of the guild, and he was freed from captivity. The sleeping Eugene suddenly woke up and opened his eyes. He sat up on the bed and asked Eugene, who had entered the room, what he was doing. His brother walked towards him, and the guy asked in surprise what was wrong with him, what had come over him since the morning. He looked in surprise at his brother's hand extended to him, who demanded that the guy give him what he bought yesterday. Frightened, Eugene jabbered, asking, he was talking about shopping at the mall. He spent too much, but he thought he was allowed to spend all this money. The younger one shouted that that was not the point, but the black poison fog orb. The eldest held out the ball in his palm, but before he even had time to clarify, his brother grabbed it and squeezed it in his fist. Surprised, Eugene asked why, and then corrected himself and asked how he even knew he bought it. Eugene looked at the palm, asking the elder does he not trust him at all. The guy looked at his brother, who made a surprised sound. Eugene started to ask what he was talking about, but was interrupted because Eugene suddenly hugged him. A question was heard in the room. What's wrong with the youngest? Eugene asked his brother if he bought it, being prepared even to die if necessary. Continuing to hug his brother, the younger one closed his eyes and continued that if his enemies targeted the older one, he would become his weak point. The guy said that this is why his brother was ready to poison himself so that they could not use him as a hostage. Eugene's face was extremely surprised, and he thought that there was nothing like that. The guy began to deny, and the younger brother let him go and looking into his eyes said that he was so worried about him, but he still should never use something like that. The beaming Eugene confidently stated that even if something like this happened, he would definitely come to save him. Eugene thought he bought it to use when clearing the dungeon alone, without his brother's knowledge, but now he can't say he has L-class poison resistance. But Eugene agreed out loud and thanked his brother. He had the feeling that there were more and more misunderstandings. The elevator arrived at floor B1. Eugene looked at his brother and asked if everything had already been resolved with Jaram, to which Eugene replied that yes, Seok went to her house yesterday. The younger one looked forward, saying that, apparently, the guardian spent billions of the girl's inheritance on his own business. He remembered the picture of a man in a suit, handing a paper to a disgruntled, screaming guardian. The guy said that in exchange for the fact that they would not sue, he wrote a receipt that under no circumstances would he approach or contact the girl. He won't interfere anymore. The guild has success. The guy stepped forward, leaving the elevator, and the eldest asked, Jaram really agreed not to sue. But what about the inheritance of her parents? To this, the younger replied that yes, she said that she simply did not want to contact him anymore. Eugene scratched his neck and agreed, saying that now that amount would rather seem ridiculous, and Eugene looked at his smartphone and said that the girl had also gradually finished adapting to her abilities and seemed to have spent all of last night in the training room. Above the entrance to the room, there was a sign stating that this was a training room. Eugene said that this room can withstand even the power of S rank, so she can use it as much as she wants. The guys froze at the entrance to the hall, which was simply destroyed, with fragments of blocks and broken stones lying inside. They saw destroyed walls, large dents, and cracks. Suddenly, a piece of concrete support fell next to the amazed guys. Eugene confusedly asked that this hall can withstand the power of S rank, to which Eugene sheepishly said that yes, but against the background of a large crack in the wall, a rod, broken off from its fastening, flew past and fell. Among the fragments of tiles and concrete, Jaram quickly rushed headfirst, holding a chain in her hands. Somersaulting in the air, she landed and slammed her palm onto the floor. The black punching bag swayed. Releasing the ice from her fist, the hooded girl swung her second fist. Surrounded by small ice flows, she used the Shadowless Day skill. Jaram stamped her foot, and black rays of power rushed across the floor from her foot. The guys looked around, and Eugene asked in surprise what happened to the training room. Did something really happen to Jaram? He looked down in surprise. A black shadow from the girl rushed towards his leg, gluing it to the floor, and the guy said in surprise that he could not move. The girl looked intently and said the command to activate the skill. The fragments of stone were covered with a black sticky substance. Like the training barbell, blue fumes rose from the black marks. Covered in a black mass up to his shoulders, Eugene screamed, and his brother called out to him in surprise. Black shadows swirling across the floor connected with the girl, who put her fist to her chest. Jaram raised her foot, the sole of her shoe glowing blue. Surrounded by the radiance, she slammed her foot down to the ground, breaking the floor. Jaram quickly ran forward, and her steps crumbled the tiles on the floor. With a scream, the girl raised her fist to strike, and she hit the floor with her fist, raising not only blue shining flashes, but also fragments of stones. Cracks from the floor even spread to the walls of the training room. The girl stood confidently, clenching her fists glowing with blue power. Suddenly she heard her brother's requests to wake up. Surprised, she turned to the guy she called uncle. She was amazed to see Eugene, who, holding white Eugene on his knees, asked him not to die, and told the girl that she had become stronger. Jaram screamed for the guy to come to his senses. They shook white Eugene by the shoulders, bringing him to his senses. Suddenly, the guy opened his eyes, looking at her in surprise. Eugene adjusted her hood and excitedly asked if her uncle was okay, to which he asked who she was. The girl thought in surprise that he had lost his memory, and asked if he didn't remember she was Jaram, to which Eugene shouted that he knew, but she had changed beyond recognition, and the surprised Eugene said that the stylist had worked with her. The girl beamed, as if against the backdrop of refreshing lemonade, smiled, standing in a confident pose with a new haircut, and said that World's Edge had corrected her image. Because she would soon be going to the Hunter Association, Eugene said it suits her. All sports drink advertisements will be. Smiling contentedly, she imagined Hermes, thinking that this was his style combined with her skill, and said that she would be live, so she needed to follow the picture. The guy asked in surprise that they also do something like this, and then remembered that S rank is for celebrities. The folder contained the girl's documents and her photograph. She said that she had already prepared documents for registering the hunter, which would need to be provided. She constantly signs something and at the same time sorts out her skills. Holding a folder with documents in her hands, Jaram smiled shyly and said that she didn't notice the guy coming in, to which he replied, "Those were indeed her skills, but what are they?" The girl imagined icy whirlwinds flying forward and said that the first one was a freezing sigh. He saw it last time. A circle with symbols appeared under the girl's foot, and she said that Hermes' shoes allow you to fly and instantly move short distances. The girl presented a skill in which black shadows emanated from her and said that shadowless they applied a boost to a wide area. Jaram said that when using it, the effectiveness of skills and attributes greatly increases, and she can also slow down the enemy by absorbing his shadow, which also gives. Eugene held her documents and asked that she becomes even stronger by absorbing power from her surroundings. He realized that it was because of this skill that the training hall had turned into ruins. Jaram, thoughtfully, said that there is another skill, the last one, White Corpse, which allows you to read information from a corpse. Eugene listened carefully. Thoughtful, he said that it was quite creepy, and the girl scratched the back of her head and confirmed, saying that it was supposed to be an attack skill. The thoughtful voice of Eugene was heard in the office, who said that they would hide White Corpse for now, and the girl asked again in surprise. The brunette held her documents and pen in his hands and explained that it was not necessary to disclose all the skills when registering. The blue-haired girl listened attentively to the guy who was correcting the data in her documents, saying that since this happened, it would be better to hide a few more details. For example, in Shadowless Day, you can only record the effect of sitting, and in Hermes' shoes, only flying, which is suit. She smiled joyfully, touching the guy's hand, and said that he was so good at this. Like a specialist, Eugene looked on in surprise as his brother smiled at the compliment and asked if she had mastered power control. The younger shielded the surprised brother with himself and told the surprised girl that he was so well aware of everything because for his sake, he delved into all the details and advised her to keep his distance. Eugene watched in confusion as Jaram angrily asked the head of the guild that she was not addressing him and why he was interfering, to which the guy said that he did not interfere, but helped his older brother with an explanation. The eldest sheepishly scratched his cheek with his finger, thinking with a chuckle that this is really possible, so everything will be okay. Many photographers gathered near the tall multi-story glass building. Jaram got out of the car under camera flashes. She smiled and walked past cameras, phones and voice recorders pointed at her. Park Jaram, the new S rank, is released. The photographers were taking pictures of the girl, and behind her stood two dark figures. The reporter said that this is the birth of the 8th S rank combat hunter in the country. Jaram only has 3 starting skills. Eugene, wearing a mask and cap, peeked around the corner standing next to Seonghan and said that the girl was doing well, to which the defender replied that instead of acting like that, he should just accompany her. Seonghan folded his arms and said that Jaram was upset because Eugene didn't go with her, and the guy laughed and replied that he has a lot of bad memories of crowded places. Pulling off the mask from his face, Eugene said that resentment has its end. Now that fame and fortune awaits her, it will surely fade into the background. The man remained silent, looking at him. And the guy said that the main thing is that everything will be fine. This pleases me the most. Eugene thought the changes were too big. He remembered the serious girl with long hair surrounded by ice, and thought that there was no trace left of the cold and arrogant Jaram from the future, whom he knew. The real girl with the new hairstyle was smiling widely. The guy thought that now instead of her, there was a Jaram high school student imbued with a confident smile. He remembered the monster with eyes between the tentacles that came out of the gate, and thought that the dungeon breakthrough that happened a few days ago also did not happen in the first place. Will everything be okay if the future he saw changes so much? Eugene straightened his cap, shook his head, and thought that what difference does it make? What's good is good. What's important now is different. Since he came to the association, he needs to see if there are any newcomers with good potential here. The guy peeked around the corner. looking at the crowd. Letters appeared above the people indicating their class. The guy saw that there was F rank, E rank. He chuckled and thought that finding another S rank would be a huge success. Eugene looked at the people carefully, thinking that he was unlikely to find anything here. What kind of high-level awakened would just walk around here? Suddenly he took off and ran, and Seonghin looked at him in surprise, asking where he was going. The guy thought that nothing was impossible. He imagined how the crystals of the precious stones sparkled in his palms. He remembered that it all started with the fact that he actually turned back time to save his younger brother once he was able to change everything for the better for Jaram and for him and Eugene. He saw the figure of a guy with long hair. The guy thought that perhaps his gift had been given to him. Eugene grabbed the guy's wrists. As he ran, his cap and mask flew off. The stranger turned to look at him in surprise, and the guy thought he was needed to make the uncut diamond that caught his eye shine. The long-haired guy looked in surprise, asking who he was. System information, meanwhile, informed Eugene that the guy was an awakened named Jum Young-woo, current class F, awakening potential F, the optimal starting skill possible for learning SS rank. A guy with long hair and a backpack put on the other way asked in surprise who it was, and Eugene confidently asked, "He's Myungwoo, Yu Myungwoo. Haven't seen him for a long time. He doesn't remember him. It's Eugene, Han Eugene." The long-haired man rubbed his neck in embarrassment and apologized, saying that he really didn't remember him. The guy smiled broadly, waving his hands, and said that everything was fine. They had not seen each other for a long time. This was quite natural, but he himself thought that, to be honest, he didn't know him either. A blue circle of the ability used appeared in Eugene's eye. He saw an image of an anvil and hammer icon, and the name of the skill master of the golden smithy. He thought, this is incredible, just look at this guy's skill. An image of an ancient blacksmith working on a golden anvil appeared in his head. Eugene thought that from the name alone, it was clear that this was a special skill related to the manufacture of equipment. Moreover, SS rank. Eugene reflected that the S-Onk blacksmith who personally creates equipment. That the guy imagined an embarrassed Mayanwu surrounded by gold, guards, money, and thought that if he managed to acquire this skill, he could build himself a bed from bags of money from all over the world. The guy with the backpack looked rather embarrassed, and Eugene thought that it was all through this man, who looked like a runt depressed by life's difficulties. The elder looked at the guy's documents, asking if everything was fine with him. Did he also wake up? The long-haired one sheepishly replied that yes, although F rank, they give $1 million in subsidies for registering an awakened one. Myungwoo held documents with his information in his hand, and Eugene exclaimed that he was also an F rank. The guy asked if he would go with him to get basic training. Smiling, the long-haired man said that he only came for a subsidy. You have to pay for basic training, but F rank and it are not needed anywhere. It is now worthless. Eugene grabbed the guy's palm with both hands. Looking at him with enthusiasm, the brunette smiled and invited him to study with him in their guild. Eugene said that he would get it for free. One word from him, but suddenly Seonghin grabbed him by the collar, and Youngwoo looked at it in surprise. The guard told the guy that only members of the guild could receive training for new hunters. Myungwoo looked at this picture in surprise, asking, "Is this Seong Han from World's Edge?" Eugene asked to make an exception for just one person, and the defense lawyer referred to the charter. He asked the guy who was hanging in the hands of a serious man, like a kitten, if they knew each other, and how. Smiling confidently, Eugene pointed a finger at himself and told the amazed guy that the head of the guild was his younger brother. Myungwoo covered his eyes with his hands and squinted, turning away from his interlocutors, asking about the head of World's Edge and saying that he suddenly began to blind his eyes. To which Eugene smiled contentedly and replied that it was a halo of power. The elder said that he would put in a good. Myungwoo, still covering his eyes, asked that even equipment. Is it really possible? He held the guy's gloved hands and said he couldn't even remember him. Eugene held the embarrassed guy's palms and told him not to worry about it and just agree he wants to take care of him because Myungwoo is a good person. With an embarrassed smile, the brunette continued that he actually deserves such treatment. Looking at the guy with shining eyes, the long-haired one repeated what he really deserves. His eyes filled with tears. With sobs, he fell to his knees in front of Eugene, who called out to him in surprise. The brunette told the guy to drink some warm tea. There was a glass of tea in the machine. Eugene handed Myungwoo one of the glasses of tea, saying that it would, of course, be better to buy expensive coffee in some cafe, to which the long-haired man said that everything was fine, that was enough for him. Sitting with a glass of tea in his hands and looking down, Myungwoo answered positively when asked if he had calmed down. He wiped away the remaining tears with his finger and apologized for the fact that it was so unexpected he had not heard such words for too long. Eugene looked at him. Saying that he had a hard time, Myungwoo smiled a little and began to tell me that as a child he had a talent for working with his ha. He remembered making a dinosaur with his hands while his classmates and teachers stood around him. Then he remembered people sitting at the university reading books and said that as an adult, this was of no use. Everyone just told him to stop fooling around and get down to studying. A pile of papers fell on the guy standing on top with a backpack in his hands. He said that that's when he went to the bottom. Because he was completely incompetent in his studies, he said that his grades at the university were terrible. He couldn't get a job, and there were also family circumstances. Looking into his glass of tea, Myungwoo said that at some point he found himself in such a deplorable situation and with a lot of debt, like an outsider with nowhere to turn. The brunette sat next to him and listened to him. Then he lowered his gaze, saying that he understood him perfectly. Eugene thought that even after the world changed, everything remained the same. He remembered how one of the students bullied him, saying that he was F rank and dared to say something to D rank. He reflected that people are literally divided into classes. Then he remembered how they called out to him, asking where he was going to climb, and thought that only combat and healing skills were welcome. An image of a railroad appeared in his head, illustrating the idea that if he left this road, he would be F rank among hunters, F rank in society. He imagined Myungwoo standing alone in the dark and wondered what would have become of him in the original scenario. He would never have been able to rekindle his talent. Perhaps he would have continued to be the same. Eugene squeezed his knee with his palm and thought that everything was fine. Anyway, now he can. Jumping to his feet, he looked at the sunset sky and encouraged the guy. Turning to the surprised Myungwoo with a smile, he urged him not to become limp, because what difference does it make that others don't accept? After all, they live in a world in which it is difficult to survive alone. Putting his arm around the guy's shoulders, he pointed his finger forward and quoted the words that he should confidently raise his head. If he remains depressed, the money for the spine operation will also fly away. Myungwoo sat on the bench and watched as Eugene confidently raised his fists in the air, shouting that he is great and others just don't understand it. He loves himself. Turning around, he smiled and encouraged the guy to think like this. Looking at Myungwoo with a smile, he called him a friend and said that he loved him too. Myungwoo looked at the brunette with a confused look. Agreed, he said that they would do so, and thanked him. The system reported that the awakened Myungwoo received beneficial influence from the code word. The sun was setting and illuminated the city with golden rays. The guy thought that this would be solved so simply, but no. A serious man in glasses, the head of the HR department of World's Edge, Simeon, confidently said that it is impossible. Eugene looked at him confused. They sat across from each other. At the table, Simeon put his hands on the potential newcomer's information and said that it was wrong to allow a stranger to receive training for guild newcomers. Eugene begged him to give in just once with a smile. Lost in thought, the man clasped his fingers and said that giving in and sending a person to training was the same as vouching for him. Myungwoo spat out his tea when he heard that there would be rumors that such a privilege was given to some dog bones lying around somewhere. Eugene held his friend, who had fainted from embarrassment, and shouted that it was rude. What kind of dog bone? And Simeon adjusted his glasses, saying that he only meant that somewhere they could say that. Holding the white-faced guy, the brunette asked him to stop doubting and trust him for once. He really is an honest person. Simeon took off his glasses, covering his eyes, and said that, of course, he knows that Eugene has outstanding insight. That he found Jaram is already an incredible achievement. Then, adjusting his glasses on the bridge of his nose with his middle fingers, he concluded that it could just be an accident. Eugene exclaimed indignantly, "What kind of finger is this?" Tea was time for Eugene to spit out the coffee when the man said that, to be honest, he didn't understand his intentions. Especially considering that just a few days ago the guy was caught scamming a broker. The guy encouraged the head of the guild to do housekeeping, and now he's also getting promoted. Myungwoo imagined Eugene as a lady in a pink dress who is chased away from her son by a lady in green after hearing that it is highly undesirable to protect the safety of World's Edge. Upset, the guy thought that the brunette was being insulted because of him. Covering his face with his hands, the long-haired man ran out of the office, ignoring Eugene, who called out to him, telling the man to stop. He would just leave. The guy stood outside the building. The head's older brother grabbed his head, shouting that Simeon was getting tougher every time. and Myungwoo confirmed with a smile that he was a scary person. Eugene took the phone in his hands, saying that he would ask his little brother directly, and the long-haired one shook his head saying that there was no need. With a smile, he looked at the guy and said that he was valuable, that's enough. Eugene looked at his friend in surprise, who said that thanks to him, he had the will to live a little longer. Resolutely clenching his fist, the long-haired man said that he would not be discouraged and would try to do what he could. To be honest, in some places, they offered work for F ranks like him. A black car drove up to the pedestrian crossing. Eugene asked in surprise, "Where is it in this place?" The car stopped next to the guys, and Myungwoo confirmed that they said they would pick him up here. A big hand opened the car door. The man called Myungwoo. 3 men with tattoos and angry looks looked out of the car. One of them asked that he had become a hunter, so now it was time to repay his debts, right? With an encouraging smile, Myungwoo looked at his friend and said that he would go, gain strength, earn money, and contact him again. Eugene looked at the people in the car in confusion, thinking, wait, this looks very dangerous. A shaven-headed man in tattoos put his arm around the guy's shoulders and with a menacing smile asked if their Myungwoo received a subsidy, to which the guy excitedly reached into his backpack, saying that yes, here it is. With a sharp movement, the man snatched the money from the guy's hand, laughingly saying that he knew that this was not enough at all. The men looked at Eugene, who looked into the car, asking who they were, the creditors, where were they taking Myungwoo? The strangers got angry and showed their teeth. The fat man with glasses asked if he would find out and what would he do. The excited guy smiled and said that he also wanted to go with him. The car roared along the road. The worried guys sat in the back seat next to a confident man in dark glasses and were silent. Unhappy, Eugene whispered to his friend that he borrowed money from terrible people, to which Myungwoo replied that the bank did not give him a loan, and then said that what is more important is why the guy followed him. He doesn't even have a debt. He excitedly heard his friend's counter question about how he was supposed to let him go alone. The bandit looked at them, asking if they knew each other. Was he also awakened? Eugene turned around in fear and replied that yes, F rank. Myungwoo began to say that the guy was from World's Edge, but with a smile, his friend covered his mouth with his hand and said that they were childhood friends. They met by chance in the Hunters Association. Eugene said that he learned from him that there is a job that takes F rank, so he became curious. The bespectacled bandit chuckled contentedly, saying that it had turned out well. The tattooed bandit sitting opposite them leaned towards them and asked with a smile if they would try to go to the dungeon together to get 1 magic stone for them. The man added that they know that guilds usually don't teach F rank. Eugene covered his mouth with his hand in admiration and asked if it was true when he heard that they were taking everyone even F rank. Smirking, the bandit told the hero that since he was a friend of Manhwa, they had a special relationship with him and asked if they would go together, to which Eugene resolutely clenched his fist and said that they would. With a sweet smile, the guy threw his hand behind his head, saying that at first he mistook them for scary men, but they turned out to be such good people. Hearing this, all the bandits in the car laughed loudly. One of the bandits, laughing, offered to immediately conclude a contract. With a wide smile, Eugene said that thanks to them, he would get a job, but he himself thought that this was a miner's contract. The guy remembered how he was in a gloomy dungeon with a pickaxe in his hands and thought that one day he himself fell for it. They sent even F rank to the dungeon without experience and equipment and get collecting, while the rest of the guild members are hunting. Eugene thought that this wasn't a neck. Blood dripped onto the dirty floor of the dungeon, illustrating the guy's words that, if you're unlucky, being wounded or killed by a monster is quite common. Eugene looked at the guy who was looking ahead anxiously and thought the future Myungwoo was trampled and died in such a place, never being able to reveal that talent. The driver of the car turned around and said that all they had to do was collect everything that looked worthwhile, and then they would become rich in no time. Eugene asked enthusiastically what was happening. You could just collect it. This is a real jackpot, but he thought to himself that they were scammers. The car was moving along the road. A conversation was heard from it. The guy asked where the office of their guild was and, having received the answer that it was in Myeongmokdong, exclaimed that it was not very far. A small brick building appeared, and the bandit said that they had arrived. Myungwoo was hiding behind Eugene, who admiringly said that Hope Errand Services is a good name. The man opened the doors with a grin and told them to come in. Going upstairs, the guy with an overly pleased smile said that although the building was outdated, he felt a future full of hope. Eugene walked between 2 bandits and, looking back, spoke that the office on the 2nd floor has good lighting. He didn't have time to praise the stairs because someone else's foot pushed him in the back from behind. he exclaimed as he fell to the office floor. The men sitting in the office stopped eating and turned around, looking at the guy trying to get up. He smiled and tried to ask what pushed him from behind. But suddenly he noticed Myung-woo lying curled up on the floor, being kicked by two men. He jumped to his feet, shouting that they had started here, and the bandit, grinning, put his hand on his shoulder flashing his gold tooth. The man apologized that they had also brought him in without debt, but he had better regret that he came here voluntarily. The men, grinning evilly, looked at the guy who was holding his friend on his lap. One of them said that you can enter here of your own free will, but you cannot leave. Myung-woo wiped his face with his hand and asked the guy for forgiveness. Tears were flowing from the guy's eye. The second one was covered. He said that he had to go through this alone, and because of him, a debt-free friend also fell under the distribution. Eugene, looking at him, began to speak, calling his name, but someone's hand grabbed him by the shoulder, saying that they should come here. They need to conclude a contract now. The man set the guy down on the sofa next to another bandit. Eugene looked in surprise at the contact sheet that was handed to him with the words that he should put his fingerprint on it. The head of the guild in a shirt and jacket held a glowing sheet of agreement in his hands and said that minus the commission, his profit is 20%, and since he has no debts, it means he will earn a lot of money. The paper glowed. Blue circles hovered around it. The man said that this is a special contract of the Awakened One. Unceremonious violation of its terms imposes a D-rank curse, so they should not even think of escaping by breaking it. The bandits surrounded Myung-woo and forcefully pulled his hand to the sheet and hurried him to put his fingerprint. Turning to the guild leader with a paper in his hands, Eugene said that he had a request. The man asked again displeasedly and said that even if he begged, it wouldn't work. Looking away in embarrassment, the guy squeezed the paper in, saying that this was not the case. Asked to compare the contracts, he said that it would be a shame if he had the same conditions as the guy, because he doesn't even have a debt. The bandits, along with the leader, stared at him in surprise, and then they laughed until they cried, saying that the guy was very attentive to detail. Eugene looked happily as the head handed him a glowing contract with the words that you need to live, thinking first of all about yourself. Let him check. The brunette was carefully reading the terms of the contract when he was asked what he would say. The guy reading the contract chuckled that Myung-woo would not be able to get more than 10%, and the grinning boss said that that's it, and these 10 will go to pay off the debt. Eugene exhaled that this was indeed a real slave contract. He took the paper with his fingers from both sides. The guy asked how dare they keep Myung-woo as a laborer or something like that. Looking confidently at the bandit, he tore the contract down the middle with both hands. The head and his subordinates stared at him in surprise, asking why he broke contact and what about the curse. Eugene looked at them carefully. The system reported that due to the termination of the contract, a level to debuff curse would be activated. The guy leaned his hand on the back of the sofa. The system notification stated that the debuff curse had been removed by level L curse resistance. Suddenly, Eugene kicked the guild master directly in the head. The bandit screamed, calling out to him. As they looked at this, the man held his head, closed one eye and yelled that this bad man was not F rank. Confidently clenching his fist, Eugene forcefully slammed his head into the floor with his other hand. The head lay defeated on the floor and cracks spread across the floor from his head. Confidently holding his hand, demonstrating his muscles, the guy said that he would start with the fact that he was really F rank and added to himself that he was in the best equipment. The bandit shouted, swinging sticks and fists, insulting him and saying that he would die here today. The men advanced, holding a heavy dumbbell in their hands. Myung-woo sat fearfully on the floor, behind the confident Eugene. The brunette looked at them seriously, holding a smartphone in his hand, to which he was told that it was too late to call the police. Instead of answering, the guy showed them a screen where it was clear that he had been talking with Seong-han for 25 minutes and 37 seconds. They asked in surprise that this was not the police. Opening the locked office doors with his hands, an enraged Seong-han burst in with flaming eyes. And Eugene, confidently holding the phone in his hand, stated that he had been following them for a long time. The bandits looked at the angry defender in surprise, asking what was going on. Seong-han frowned as he raised his fist to strike. The man's fist glowed. The bespectacled bandit asked that he had accomplices, even just one, but he didn't have time to finish. A powerful fist slammed into his stomach so hard that even his glasses came off. Everyone present in the room looked in surprise at the bandit, who flew far back from the powerful blow. They called out to him in alarm as his body fell to the floor with a crash. Myung-woo, sitting next to Eugene, who was holding him down, asked in surprise how he did it while the voices shouted how dare they hit the head. Eugene remembered how, smiling, he walked with the bandit in glasses and said that everything was simple. The guy's hand found the phone. He explained that from the moment they got into the car, he secretly pressed the call button. Seong-han looked carefully at his smartphone. Eugene explained that this was enough for him to understand the situation, especially since he told in detail where exactly they were, so it was easy to find them. With a straight face, Seong-han was in the enemy's face. With a swing of his fist, he hit the next bandit. The bald, tattooed bandit sat next to the beaten brunette and gritted his teeth in anger as he addressed the guard. He grabbed a knife from behind his back. With insults and shouting that if the man did not stop, he ran at the defender, who turned on him with a knife. Myung-woo saw this and screamed in fear that no, this guy has a knife. The bandit stabbed Seong-han in the torso, and looking in shock, he made a surprise sound. The blade of the knife cut the fabric, but did not even scratch the torso of the man, who was shining with the strength of his muscles. The bandit said in surprise that this could not happen. How? Seong-han towered over him, dominating him with a scarlet aura of suppression, and raised his fingers folded to click above the bandit's head, saying that he should have taken a weapon worth a rank. From a click on the forehead, the criminal flew far back, and the man did not even change his face. An alarmed partner called out to the fallen bandit named Deok-soo, and another pointed a finger at the man, saying a rank, and then recognized him. Seong-han exhaled, turning his head to the side, and the bandit said that this Mr. Seong-han is from World's Edge. Looking fiercely at the bandits, the man ordered them to kneel down. The criminals, along with the gang leader, fell to their knees, and Seong-han calmly asked Myung-woo if he was injured, to which he received the answer that it was tolerable. Seong-han turned to Eugene, asking what to do with them, to which the guy replied, "What do you have to think about? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth." The guy carefully read the papers with contracts that he held in his hands. He handed the gang leader a yellow sheet with an S-rank contact, telling him to sign it. The bandit excitedly read the contract, asking again what it was. A profit of 10%, a contract for 50 years. This is a complete fraud. Beaming and folding his palms in a sweet gesture, with a wide smile on his face, Eugene said that it is too much to call it a scam. It is not a scam, but a super part-time job, where you can simply pick up something that can bring you money. The bandits were worried, talking to each other, saying that 50 years, it can't be. It's funny, because it's the same as if he sent them to their deaths. A piece of paper landed on the face of the indignant head, and he whined that this was a slave contract. The man held the golden paper in his hands and watched in surprise as Eugene confidently threw many white sheets onto his head. Taking one sheet, he asked what it was, and the guy replied that he found them in a box. Throwing the sheet out of his hand, the guy continued that these were contracts of the F ranks. They had kidnapped more than 30 people. The head looked anxiously at the hero, who asked how many of them remained uninjured, and hastened to justify himself that it didn't matter. They all agreed to it voluntarily, and it was not their fault. Even if you find out, more than half are already dead. Eugene, holding the papers in his hand, suddenly kicked the gang leader in the head. The man held his cheek, and the guy called him an insulting word. Crumpling the sheet in his hand, he looked down at it and asked, "Does he think that if they are F rank, then he doesn't care even if they die?" The guy continued that if you push them with promises to take them to the dungeon, many will agree, and then it's enough to push them there like some kind of sea. Eugene looked at the bandit carefully. Myung-woo called him admiringly, standing next to Seong-han, when he heard the guy say that no matter what level they are also people, and gang members are killers. There were many sheets of old contracts on the floor. The brunette told them to crawl, as they had been crawling until now. Then they would understand what they had done. Eugene turned away, saying that he really wanted to throw them straight into a high-level dungeon. The fat bandit sitting behind him called out to him worried. He said that he was to blame. They were all to blame. They would think it over. So at least this time, let him take pity on them, okay? Eugene calmly listened to the bandit's pleas that a 50-year contract was already too much. Let him come to terms with it. The guy smiled charmingly and said that it was good. Patting the bandit on the head, he said that it was good that they wanted to think things over. He squeezed the man's head with his fingers and, leaning towards him, said that he needed to pay the appropriate price for his crimes. The hero said to take them away from here. A car was driving through the evening city, and from there came words that the criminals had been taken to the Hunters Association. Seong-han, while driving, reported into a wireless headset about what was handed over to the employee. The victims were paid compensation, and would later provide a report in the back seat. A tired Eugene slumped over Myung-woo's shoulder, saying that it had been a crazy day. In the car, words of gratitude were heard to the guy who asked why. Eugene smiled and shook his head, saying that it was nothing, and the long-haired one said that he couldn't help but worrying. The brunette looked at the guy and thought that later, with the awakening of his skill, he would receive good benefits. Myung-woo clutched the backpack that was on his lap and said that the guy had already saved him twice. The long-haired man cried, and the surprised hero asked why he was crying again and asked him to calm down, to which his friend said that if it weren't for him, what would have happened to him now? Eugene was not allowed to say that this was nothing because Myung-woo threw himself on his neck, hugging him, crying and saying that he really was his hero. The car was driving along the road and shouts could be heard from it about the guy not being stupid, but rather thanking Seong-han and the calm voice of the driver who told them both to buckle up. A glass multi-story building towered over the night city. The hero remembered that immediately after returning, he went to Simeon after he told him the whole story. He as Jaram's guardian was able to get a room for himself in the dorm. Simon watched in shock as Eugene lay on the floor by his door, preventing him from leaving. Then the following happened. The room shone with cleanliness and newness, had a wide bed and other furniture. An admiring question was heard, "Is this really a dorm room?" Myung-woo looked around the room, saying that it looked like a luxury apartment, and Eugene, who was holding a booklet, said that they write that there are 4 rooms. Myung-woo was looking around the area with armchairs and a coffee table, saying that you could live in a place like this while studying, and the guy called out to him. Looking at the long-haired man, Eugene asked him if he knew how to do housework, to which he received the answer that the guy knew how to cook ramen. Myung-woo listened in surprise to the guy's words that outsiders are not allowed into this dormitory, but housekeeping workers are allowed to stay in it. How about pretending to be a worker after training to stay here? Eugene waved his hands, telling the surprised guy that this didn't mean he would have to actually do housework. The guy's admiring eyes, shining with tears, did not allow him to finish the sentence that it would be a long time before he settled here. Myung-woo threw himself on his neck, shouting that the guy was such a kind and good friend, to which the brunette exclaimed that he was crying again and asked to let him go. The long-haired man slept with his palms on the pillow. Eugene looked into the guy's room and thought that he quickly fell asleep. He was probably exhausted. Myung-woo muttered in his sleep for the guy to trust him with all the housework. Bath first or dinner? Eugene thought confusedly. What kind of sleep talk is this? He closed his eyes, contentedly saying that he needed to move things from Yu-yeon's room, who would be unhappy if he found out that he was moving. Turning to the exit, the guy bumped into Seong-han standing in the aisle and screamed in fear. He shouted indignantly, asking if Yu-hyun sent him, again ordered him to be locked up, to which he received a negative answer. Seong-han pointed a finger behind him, saying that this time he was on a different matter. Eugene looked at the man in surprise, who said that the matter was not easy and asked to follow him. The waiter, tired from his work, carefully carried a tray of drinks while many groups in the bar were animatedly communicating with each other. A young man, holding a mug of beer in his hand and a tray in the other, greeted visitors with a smile on his face. Having seen the new ones, he wanted to find out how many there were. But Seong-han walked into the bar wearing a dark shirt, with Eugene awkwardly standing behind him. The waiter hiccuped so much in fear that sweat began to flow all over his body. The man raised his glasses with one hand and asked him if he knew Kim Min-woo. The guy's face turned blue from the sight of him, after which he bent over and pointed to the side. He said that he received a call about him and then offered to take Seong-han and Eugene to a quieter place. Eugene became confused when the bar patrons began whispering to each other as they walked past them, and one young man with earrings sitting next to her assumed that they had come for money. The table is bursting with the number of appetizers for drinks, French fries, Caesar salad, and soup with sausages. The waiter said he served them the most popular item on the menu. The guys felt embarrassed by what was happening, but the young man bowed before them again, asking them to call him if they needed anything. Eugene looked around and wondered why he was brought here. Because this place looks like a youth place, Seong-han said this is the place recommended by a hunter from the abyss, who is about the same age as him. He said Minui suggested the place because it was popular among his peers. There's a neon sign on the wall of the bar that says Oppa is especially attractive when he's drinking, and there's music playing throughout the place. Eugene remembered that he is now a little over 20. While the song was playing in the bar, Seong-han held his hands to his face and advised the guy to relax and enjoy the atmosphere. And although he was still tense from what was happening, Eugene agreed with him. The guy started opening a bottle of soju. With a smile on his face, he asked Seonghin why they came here. At that moment, the man took the drink from him because he wanted to pour it himself. While the man was holding the soju with both hands, Eugene felt awkward and didn't understand what was happening. Seonghin said that he wanted to apologize to him before it was too late. The guy made a face at what he heard so that all his muscles tensed when the man told him that he had not liked him all this time. Since he seemed to him a stupid obstacle interfering with the future of the head of the guild, Eugene was in a stupor because after the apology, he received insults in his. The man blossomed as he admitted to the guy that he actually turned out to be a good person. Eugene no longer understands what Seonghin is talking about. He began to remember the moment when they were squatting together. He noted that the guy returned to help him as soon as the dungeon broke through. I also remember the moment Jaram awakened when she used her skill. He noted that at that moment the guy also entered into a contract with her, and he added that in the midst of all this, he not only resolved a problem with a guardian that could have become a source of trouble. He remembered how today Eugene sat between his friend and the bandit. The man noted that he went to save him, risking his safety. The guy was embarrassed by such confessions. Looking at him, Seonghan said that he could now trust him and also trust him to cover the rear. Eugene became so thoughtful that his eyes widened. He realized that this was a chance that he needed to take advantage of and use a code word to strengthen relationships. He imagined how he would say this word to him when they got drunk. Eugene clinked glasses with him, filled with sayu. He began to smile. He thanked his friend for his good opinion of him. The guy decided to make him his pupil tonight. The man looked at him and noted that Eugene had handled today's incident incredibly skillfully. Then he asked if he had some kind of secret plan regarding the awakening brokers a few days earlier. The guy, holding his chin with his fingers, remembered how the guards dragged him up the stairs by the shoulder. He told Seonghan that he was investigating something back then. As Eugene tucked into a mouth-watering chicken salad, he added that it was a risky endeavor for the F class. He said that he went there assuming that Yu Hyan wouldn't just leave it like that. The guy scratched his head in embarrassment. He also said that he grabbed him before there was even a single assumption because Yu Hyan is very worried about him. Seonghin replied that this is so because he is his only relative. Things could be worse. After which the man brought the glass to himself and said that he understood him perfectly since he himself was in a similar position. The guy left his salad aside and turned his attention to the man sitting opposite him. Seonghin admitted that he was raised by his grandparents as he also grew up without parents. The man remembered the moment he woke up during a dungeon strike when he was protecting his family. He said that after he grew up, he came to them every vacation to look at their well-being. He imagined an image of Yu Hyan in his head, saying that the head helped him until they died last year. He added that the guy even hired a foreign healer specializing in caring for the sick. The man remembered the brunette with a smile on his face since he knows so well the value of family ties. Eugene again held out his glass for his interlocutor to pour for him. The man told him to treat his brother with understanding, even if his concern seemed excessive. To which the guy said that he would do so, adding that he himself becomes calmer now that he sees that his youngest right hand is a person who understands him perfectly. Seonghan smiled at the compliment in his direction and continued drinking together. The guy said that in future, he would ask him to take care of him too. The bar is illuminated with a disco ball. Eugene raised his head in surprise and looked at Seonghan when he noticed that he was resistant to alcohol, although you couldn't tell from his appearance. Holding his glass in his hand, he admitted that he could only drink so much because he had an embarrassing habit that manifested itself when he was drunk, while the interlocutor did not suspect anything. The guy decided to prepare the ground for now and use a code word, pretending that the alcohol There was already a huge pile of empty bottles on the table. Seonghan noticed this and said that the guy had drunk too much. Meanwhile, the young man widened his eyes when he saw such a quantity, since he did not realize that he had drunk so much due to so much alcohol. He decided to pretend to be drunk, and his mouth began to drool, and his eyes looked in all directions. In fact, Eugene doesn't understand why he still does. The guy assumed that this was all due to the poison resistance skill. It is depicted as a red shield with a skull on it. Eugene realized that now he would not be able to get drunk, no matter how much he drank. Seonghin looked at the young man, who, with a puzzled face, grabbed his head and squeezed his entire face. He doesn't want to say something like that sober. The man explained what suddenly came over him. Eugene raised his head and smiled. Still holding the glass in his hand, he said he was thinking about something at that moment. He tried to press the shield to turn off the skill, but at first it didn't work. Eugene began to think hard about making this skill disappear. After this, The tablet began to fall into pieces. Noticing that she was disappearing, the guy threw the glass so that all the sayu poured out of it. Seong-hin even began to sweat from what he saw. He called the guy by name. When Eugene turned red and his pupils constricted, the man asked if he was okay. The young man does not understand what is happening, as he suddenly became completely intoxicated from the amount of alcohol he drank. He muttered that he was crazy. The man stood up and looked at him warily when he added that everything had gone to his head at once. The guy hit his head on the table, where there were still a bunch of snacks. Seong-han tried to wake him up with his voice, calling his name, but it was no use. Sunlight streams through the open blinds. Eugene opened his eyes, with huge bruises around them. Dressed in blue pajamas, he stood up and grabbed his head, shouting that his head hurt. When Seong-hin approached him with a basin in his hands, walking on the bed with a dissatisfied face, the guy said that he thought the skill would just go away. The man said that he had brought water for washing. The guy was embarrassed. A man with a kind face and a soft smile stood in front of him. Eugene jumped out of bed. Grabbing the blanket, the man said that he needed to get ready if he wanted to start training from today. The guy didn't expect to see him in the morning. A system tablet appeared in front of him with a list of objects under care, including Seong-han. Eugene was still able to carry out his plan, but he still doesn't understand why he's been here since this morning. The young man looked at the morning guests with frightened eyes when he put the basin down and asked if he really didn't remember what happened last night. Eugene was shocked when Seong-hin brought his hand to his face. He hung with his hand in the air, smiling a good-natured smile, and said that he saw that he had a bad hangover. He was embarrassed because they wanted to shove a straw with a juice bag into his mouth. The guy said he didn't want something like that, but then he tried it and liked it. Seong-han looked at it and said that it was poraria juice that helps with hangovers. The man threw him onto the bed and grabbed his leg, or rather the point that needs to be pressed so that the hangover goes away quickly. Seong-han handed him a golden casket, which made Eugene embarrassed and blocked it with his hand because he didn't understand what was happening at all. The man offered to use it if necessary, if it gets too bad, but the guy indignantly asked why he was behaving this way. The man was puzzled. He realized that the young man really didn't remember anything. That's why I decided to tell you what happened last night. They were in a bar, and Eugene got so drunk that he hit the table and fell asleep next to the snacks. Seeing this, Seong-hin fussed and asked him if everything was okay. The guy was in such a state that he was all red and spoke slurred words. The man in the shirt suggested that he had had too much and then offered to stand up. At that moment, Eugene suddenly grabbed his hand. Seong-hin looked at him blankly as he bowed his head. He called him by name. The guy decided to tell him something, so he asked him to listen to him carefully. Looking closely into his eyes, he confidently told him that he loved him. The man was shocked by what he heard, so he raised his eyebrows. At that moment, Eugene grabbed his head, and the man asked him what this meant. The guy said that he himself did not understand how he confessed his love to him in such a state. He became embarrassed and blushed even more. The guy suddenly stood up from his seat. He believes that he has gone crazy, but despite this, he still said again that he loves this man. After hearing what happened last night, Eugene bowed down in shame, to which the man raised his hands up and tried to calm him down, saying that everything was fine. Seong-hin said that he ended up declaring his love about 30 times. The guy began to apologize to them for committing a mortal sin. The man admitted with a smile on his face that he liked it. Eugene repeated what he had heard. Seong-hin thinks this is quite strange. But then he remembered something. He tried to help the guy get up, but he still insisted that he loved him. The man looked at him with a smile and asked if this was the embarrassing drinking habit he had been warned about, but Eugene was unable to answer, so he only muttered an incomprehensible word. Embarrassed by his behavior, he asked him not to laugh. As he asked him to listen, the guy said again that he loves Mr. Seong-hin. It brought a smile to his face. That moment reminded him of memories from the past, when he supported a drunken older man by the shoulder to help him stay on his feet, and he said that he loved him. His grandfather pressed him close to him, so that his grandson had to bend over. Seong-hin asked him why he needed to drink so much. The man replied that he could afford to have a glass today. Since he has a reliable family member, then he has nothing to worry about. Seong-han shouted, "Oh my God!" The cheerful grandfather in the hat told him to never get hung up on what some strangers said about his parents abandoning him. He grabbed Nuk by the hair with his hand. Even though he was already much taller than him, the man called him the best and said that he loved him. Seong-han, looking at him, exhaled as he again began to be rowdy due to drunkenness. They walked down the path together, hugging each other. talking to each other. Grandfather again said that he loved him, and the man only hurried him to go faster. What happened last night was very reminiscent of this moment from his past life. Seong Han said that for some reason, looking at Eugene, he remembered his deceased grandfather. A system tablet appeared, on which it was written that the awakened Seong Han had received beneficial influence from the code word. The guy, who was still wearing pajamas, was embarrassed by what he heard. He asked him again. Sitting on his knees, the young man asked if he really resembled his grandfather. The man gave a positive answer, not understanding what was happening. Eugene grabbed his face with his hands and thought that he looked so old. Since he reminded him of his grandfather, he recalled that he was only a little over 20 at that moment. Seong-hin began to shake his head around and said that he also thought it was strange, since he was not a grandfather at all. He remembered how he covered the guy with a blanket, and Youngwoo watched it all from the aisle. The man said that he had not felt such peace for a long time, because it was as if he was next to his grandfather. There was still a bowl of water, a juice box, and a golden casket on the bed. Seong-han realized that he was constantly trying to serve something to Eugene. Since he reminded him of his grandfather, he promised that he would not talk nonsense in the presence of others. The man asked if he could occasionally inquire about the boy's well-being and visit him. Seong-hin gave him his hand and said that he so wanted to make up for all the remaining regrets to the man who raised him. A bead of sweat ran down Eugene's face. He repeated his last words. It dawned on him that this was all a teacher, or rather the effect of an ideal teacher who protects. He repeated his last words. It dawned on him that this was all a teacher, or rather the effect of an ideal teacher who protects a child with his own hands. Eugene sits thoughtfully on the bed. Looking at the floor, he realized that words about love awaken memories not of a friend or lover, but of the person who raised him. He thought that the result was a projection of this teacher, so he reminded Seong-hin of his grandfather. He remembered the behavior of Jaram, Myungwoo, and his brother. The guy realized that they see him as their teacher. Like a duckling, he thought that he was originally a mentor for Yu Yeon, so his reactions became more impulsive, and in that case. At this moment, his thoughts were interrupted by Seong-hin opening the door, and the guy became embarrassed and raised his hands, smiling, holding his hand to his face. He noticed that a trembling Myungwoo had been watching them all this time. He grabbed his shoulders so that Eugene was dragging him. The long-haired guy said that he was scared because Mr. Seong-han was suddenly at home. Jaram appeared in front of them and broke down the door with a smile on her face. She said that she heard that her uncle had moved into the dorm and even into the room next to hers. When Eugene saw the broken door with a hole, he held a toothbrush in his mouth and was embarrassed by what was happening. He asked to at least knock first. Jaram abruptly grabbed Myungwoo by the collar, which was hanging on her uncle the whole time. She asked why he stuck to him, to which he simply chuckled and called Eugene. The teacher told her that this was his friend. He thought that he believed that it was a brainwashing skill, not any education, that was capable of making even S classes no doubt follow him. Eugene thinks it's too dangerous. The brunette thought about why the system gave him such a skill. With fear, he pressed the button, thanks to which he was able to turn on the poison resistance again. A few days later, the table was set, which was filled with a variety of delicious dishes. Seeing this, Eugene said that Myungwoo had become very good at cooking. While his friends looked at the goodies, Myungwoo smiled. The teacher was embarrassed and said that he didn't have to cook like that every day. Myungwoo replied that he couldn't do that, since he doesn't even pay rent, which is why he considers himself a freeloader. Jaram, before starting to eat, asked. She started making an omelet, saying that Myungwoo should at least cook if he wanted to repay the debt, adding that even she lives separately. Hearing her words, Eugene asked to stop. The kitchen is already clean to a shine, despite the fact that Myungwoo prepared so much food while they were eating. One of them said that today Mr. Seong-han had not come yet, but yesterday he brought red ginseng. The guy said that the man went to clear the dungeon with Yu Hyan, so he will be gone. Eugene, wearing a gray sweatshirt and holding a spoon, looked at a pleased Jaram. He told her that after some time she, too, would go to the dungeon and immediately get on television. Jaram said that she would go and smash everyone, after which she would collect magic stones, thanks to which she wool. A strange aura began to appear around her, and the girl smiled devilishly, which confused those around her. She added that she would then buy a huge house, so they could live with her, and not just with their uncle, to which Eugene replied that she would freeze the snacks if she talked so much. Eugene felt embarrassed by what was happening. He asked not to be like that, as they would have to get along in the future. Jaram and Myungwoo jumped up and started pointing fingers at each other. When the teacher told them that they would be going through rookie hunter training together, Myungwoo asked, "Really, with this girl?" Did Jaram check with this guy? The teacher ran away when they started fighting among themselves because the girl was very angry, which scared Myung-woo. She exclaimed that she thought that during the training she would only be with a mentor. Out of breath, the guy opened the door for the man, asking his friends to stop. A man in a suit called him cheerful since the morning. It turned out to be Simeon, with his assistant standing behind him, and he handed the piece of paper to Eugene and said that the training starts from today. While the three looked at him with surprised faces, the man with glasses announced that the schedule had changed, so he came to visit them in person. Simeon also said that the person in charge of the theory is a little late. They suddenly changed into orange overalls and found themselves in an unknown place, holding spears in their hands. This happened because the man with glasses decided to start training with basic practice. In front of them was a cage in which there were angry monsters covered with close fur, but despite this, Simeon told them not to worry, since the essence of the practice is extremely simple. The monster, trying to get out of captivity, makes various growling sounds, showing sharp fangs. The cage disappeared. A swarm of monsters filled the entire room, and the guy shook with fear. Simeon said that they just need to destroy the monsters in front of them. He asked them, "Is it easy?" A crowd of monsters roared towards the heroes. Eugene exclaimed, asking where such a thing had been seen. The guy looked scared and was holding a spear in his hands. Myung-woo was holding on to him in fear, and Jaram was standing behind them. The guy shouted that this was basic training, after which he asked if they didn't usually get rid of one monster at a time, to which the girl asked if it was necessary. Simeon brought the walkie-talkie closer and, laughing, said that this was practice for getting used to monsters. Hordes of rodents were heading towards the heroes. The man added on the radio that the more contact there is with them, the faster they will get used to them, to which Eugene exclaimed in fear about where such a thing had even been seen. The girl moved towards the monsters, telling them not to worry because she would cut them up in no time. She made a strong push with a wide smile. One by one she struck with her spear. At the battle site, a bright light appeared and dust rose. The guys covered their faces, and Eugene said that it looked inspiring. Jaram admiringly held a spear on which the rodents were hanging and asked if it would be tasty if they were grilled. The guy asked her to lower them, joking that she had an occupational deformity. Simeon watched Jaram through the screen. She told the guy with a smile that the skills also need to be tried. A girl in a dress approached him from behind, calling Jaram a true S-class, adding that although she was a beginner, her power was especially impressive. The man looked at her with a smile. He was glad that she came. He adjusted his glasses, and the woman standing behind him said that this was basic practice, after which she asked if it was dangerous for them to fight with so many, to which he replied that she should not worry about it. He looked at the screen where the girl dumped monster corpses up a mountain, covered them in ice, and called it a Christmas tree, and said that he was more afraid that there wouldn't be enough monsters for these guys. The carcasses of rodents lay under a shiny crust of ice. Another living monster crawled out from under them. The heroes noticed it. Suddenly he rushed towards Myung-woo, which scared him very much. Eugene turned to look at him in surprise, shouting his name. The guy, looking at the approaching monster, squealed a little. Eugene shouted to him to put out his spear and cut as it was. The guy threw the spear to the floor. He quickly turned around and began to ask for help. Running away from the rodent, tears appeared in his eyes, and he shouted in a trembling voice that this would not work. A monster loomed over him. Myung-woo exclaimed in despair that he was catching up with him. Suddenly, Eugene jumped and pulled the guy out from under the monster's blow, and dust rose into the air. The guy looked in surprise at Eugene, who knelt down, holding a spear in his hand, and asked how he could even throw the weapon. Looking at the angry rodent, and said that it is an F-class monster, a toothy mole, and that it has poor eyesight, so it basically only moves in a straight line. The guy stood up, covering Myung-woo with himself, and sternly said that even if he just waved his spear, he would cut it without any problems. Simeon leaned on the table, watching the monster move towards the guys, and called Eugene by name. He said with a calm expression that he wanted to see what the guy would do. He continued to look at Eugene's face and added that the guy was trying very hard. The rodent approached the heroes at high speed. The man said that Eugene, of course, knows about monsters, and the contract signed with Jaram can be considered a standard for their sphere, but he may well be hiding something. Myung-woo looked confusedly at Eugene standing in front of him and asked if everything would be okay with him, to which the guy replied not to worry, because such a thing was even nonsense even for him. Myung-woo smiled and said that he is incredible because he is not even afraid, after which he added that, unlike him, he is just like an experienced hunter who has been in the business for several years. These words plunged the guy into a stupor. He asked himself, if he easily kills the monster, will it seem suspicious? The enraged monster rushed at him, baring his teeth. The guy threw the spear out of his hands, deciding that he would behave like a beginner, and that at the same time there would be less damage to Myungwoo's self-confidence. The mole attacked the guy, who squealed in horror that he was very scared. Myungwoo looked at him in fear. The man looked at what was happening through the glass and said that on the other hand, his eyes could deceive him. The metal doors slowly moved apart. Jaram asked if it was all over yet. They left the training area. Eugene was carrying Myungwoo. The girl was stretching her arms, saying that everything went well, but she would like to practice more. The guy, holding on to the hero, tearfully asked for forgiveness for being bitten, but he still had to support him, to which Eugene replied that he really did not have any predisposition for battles. Jaram turned to them and happily boasted that she was indeed better. The guy put his hands on his hips and told her to stop comparing. He wanted to say that they should get along, but he was interrupted by Simeon, who praised them. The man adjusted his glasses and said with a satisfied look that they had successfully completed the basic practice. He added that Jaram is incomparably amazing, but he has nothing to say about the guys, to which Eugene annoyedly said that he would tell everything to his brother. A woman from the examination room approached them, and the man, looking at her, said that, as had been decided, theoretical training would take place tomorrow, after which he introduced her and said that she would be responsible for the progress of the classes. Hyan, holding a folder in her hand, adjusted her glasses, and said with a smile that she hoped they would get along. Irem and Eugene looked at her in surprise. The girl admired the fact that she was so young and had already become a professor, and the guy exclaimed that he knew her. An image appeared in his head where Hyan stood in front of the pulpit and presented something to the public. The guy remembered that she was an authority in the scientific circles of dungeon studies, the young genius who, after her trip to the USA, discovered a pattern in the appearance of dungeons. He finished the thought out loud, which made the girl happy. He called her Dr. White. The girl approached him, saying that few people call her that, causing Eugene to shy away and say that he was pretty much interested in this area. He realized that she was not that famous yet. Ha Yeon looked him in the face and said, with a smile, that he was indeed erudite. Eugene listened in embarrassment as she said that she had heard about him from her uncle, after which she corrected herself, calling her uncle the head of the personnel department. These words made the guy think. Suddenly, Eugene, looking at Hyan and Simeon, who had adjusted his glasses, exclaimed, asking what uncle meant, after which he realized that they had the same surname. The man asked him to avoid misunderstandings because she did not work because he took advantage of his position. Hyan smiled broadly and said that for some time she would be working in the abyss in connection with one study, so they would see each other part, after which she asked to take care of her. The guy embarrassedly shook her hand and muttered that it was he who was asking, thinking that judging by the course of events, he was now in the prime of his youth. The skyscraper was illuminated by the sun's rays. The high rocks were shrouded in smoke, and something was burning underneath them. Seong Han and Yu Hyan walked across the scorched earth towards the dead flame lion. Yu Hyan asked if the guy destroyed it. Seong Han replied that he thought so, since no reactions were visible. The dead beast lay with its mouth open. The head said that he was a monster, and that he really died. The man said that they only won because the head had resistance to fire. Yu Hyan sat down next to the animal. The man standing behind him asked what they would do. Moving the carcass, they saw a small lion cub. Shining gates appeared in the darkness. Hyan said that when a dungeon first appeared in the world, the portal was floating next to the roof of the building. People in uniform stood in front of it. The girl continued to say that everything was like primitive people who first discovered fire. Another gate was floating over the road along which people were crossing, and the girl finished the thought by saying that the people, half out of caution and half out of their interest, focused their attention on them. Bird-like monsters burst out of the scarlet gates. The girl said that the dungeons, which were left unattended, gradually overflowed and burst, as a result of which monsters poured out. Monsters flew over the city. Hyan called it a dungeon breakout, adding that the dungeon shock occurred due to a simultaneous dungeon breakout. The girl in the red uniform held back the bird's mouth with all her might. The professor said that even in such a crisis, many people from among the awakened entered into battle. People in sealed suits monitored the crystals in the capsules. Hyan added that others began to invent new technologies using magic stones as a new source of energy, and that humanity was quickly adapting to the measured world. Above the building was a golden symbol of the association. The professor said that in each country an association of hunters was founded to control the awakened ones, and that most hunters conduct their activities by being in an association or being part of a guild. There were several hunters standing near this building. The girl added that S-class hunters in the country conduct activities that are mainly related to business or go the way of founding large guilds. Eugene listened with interest to the girl's lecture. The girl stood near the pulpit in front of the heroes, saying that she would then tell about the awakened ones. Eugene was thinking about that, and when he listens about it now, it gives him new thoughts. The professor pointed her hand at the screen, saying that the level of an awakened one is determined by looking at stats and skills in general. The guy looked down at the table and thought that she was giving a good lecture, and her explanation was easy to understand. The images changed on the screen, and the girl was still saying that since skills are abilities that are characteristic of each person, in a crisis situation, they manifest themselves in various forms for self-defense. The guy, looking at this, continued to think that due to the fact that the materials. A slide appeared on the screen with a girl sitting on a bed in a cluttered room with her legs crossed. It said that because she lived in an environmentally friendly environment filled with mold and moss. On the second slide, the girl put her hands forward. Next to her a plant grew to the ceiling, and the inscription said that thanks to this she received the ability of a wooden vine. Looking at this, the guy thought that the skills simply differ in inclinations and environment. The girl with the tablet leaned towards him and asked if she had made a mistake somewhere. The guy recoiled in fear from the table, and Hyen said that he looked like a professor in her specialty, after which she said that he looked that way because there was a mistake, and asked where she was. Jaram stopped drawing and looked at them, thinking that she was almost noticed. Eugene awkwardly scratched the back of his head and said that this was just his guess. Jaram and Hyen looked at the guy while he raised his hands and said that according to the professor, skills appear only at a critical moment for self-defense. However, recently the number of awakened ones whose skills are not related to battles has been growing, and, in his opinion, it has nothing to. The girl put her hand to her lips and listened with interest to the guy while he said that before it looked like this because the situation was in crisis every day due to constant dungeon breakthroughs, but in reality there may be other factors in the manifestation of skills. He looked into the professor's eyes and sheepishly said that she could simply ignore him, thinking that nothing should happen from this piece of information. Suddenly the girl grabbed the guy's hand. She approached Eugene with delight and admired the fact that he even understood the tendency of skill displays. Sweat appeared on the guy's face, and he listened in embarrassment as she said that he really deserved his uncle's attention, after which she asked if he was conducting some kind of personal research and if he wouldn't mind talking a little after the lecture, about 10 hours in total. Suddenly he extended his hand and loudly asked Jaram if she had any questions for the professor. The girl made a circle with her fingers, timidly asking how much S ranks earn. The professor grinned and said that this was an important question. She took out a bill gun. She filled the room with golden bills and, holding her hand up, said that the base salary for such heroes is $10 million. To which the girl reacted with delight. The guy asked himself if the professor brought this thing specifically for this purpose. He looked with relief as the girl issued a large number of banknotes and said that it was only natural that the salary was so outstanding because in all countries S-rank hunters were so rare that they could be counted on one hand. An image of a map with marks in the form of people appeared in my imagination, and the professor said that in addition to the fact that they fight monsters in creepy high-level dungeons and protect the safety of citizens, the image was replaced by jewelry and flowers floating in the air. The girl added that the objects obtained by them in dungeons have simply astronomical value, be it magic stones or rare animals and tree fruits. Then an image appeared with a screaming fiery lion, and the professor said that sometimes there are living magical beasts. The guy stood behind his brother and asked if he had found it in the dungeon, to which Eugene said that it was, saying that it was a fiery horned lion cub and that he thought he could tame it and use it as a mount. Eugene listened to him in surprise. He remembered what the lion cub looked like, one horn on its head, scarlet fur, and a fox-like tail. He imagined how a huge lion cut the air with its claws, setting everything on fire. The guy remembered that this is a subspecies of unicorns, a second-class fiery horned lion. It has high stats and high speed. An image appeared in my imagination of how this lion loomed over the hunters, and the guy added that this was a dangerous magical beast that even S-rank hunters would find difficult to compete with alone. The guy stood in front of the cabinet on which there was a baby. Eugene added that in front of them was his cub, and Eugene said that he had no signs of taming. He took some kind of blue necklace in his hand. Eugene asked with interest whether there were any hunters who specialized in taming, to which his brother replied that there were, but he had already tried all the basic techniques and even got the owner's sign, but said that this was not will help. This blue stone in the guy's hand was the sign of the owner, which allowed him to recognize the owner as the owner. The guy pulled it out in front of him and imperiously told the lion cub to come down to him. The kid looked at him in shock, after which he staggered standing on the cabinet. Eugene said that it seemed to him that there was an effect. The baby bared his claws. Suddenly he jumped with a scream on the face of Eugene, who shouted to his brother to be careful. He pushed away the frightened Eugene. The guy extended his hand, shrouded in a dark aura. He released a strong stream of energy from his hand. Eugene asked him not to burn the baby. The room filled with purple flames. The lion cub, shrouded in fire, still screamed. The guy remembered that fiery attacks do not affect a fiery lion. The baby, reaching the guy, scratched his face. Eugene looked at it in shock. A guy screamed in the house, shouting his brother's name. Eugene stood covered in bruises and held the disgruntled baby by the withers. He threw him behind the glass door and said that he needed to be locked in the garden. Eugene watched as the kitten landed on a tree branch and said that such a little thing has a lot of ferocity. He laid his hands on the glass and asked his brother if everything would be okay, because he behaves this way even with the presence of a sign from the owner. Eugene inspected his clothes that had been scratched by the lion cub and said that he didn't have high hopes anyway and offered to get rid of it, to which Eugene asked if he wanted to put it up for auction. The words of the guy were heard in the room, saying that he wants to kill him because if someone gets him, there may be problems, to which the brother exclaimed in shock. He looked upset at the kitten behind the glass, thinking that nothing could be done anyway, but it was still a pity, because if he could be tamed, he would be ideal for Eugene. He looked at the kitten, around which information appeared that he was currently C rank and had the ability to resist class of fire. But after growing up he could become Ors rank and gain fire breathing, fire running, and gigantization. Looking at him, he thought that even after 5 years, there was no pay. Suddenly, the guy's attention was attracted by a notification that appeared, stating that the object was in a state of incomplete application of the effect of the code word. Eugene looked blankly at his brother, frozen in a stupor, who was asking himself if he could use the training skill on monsters. An image appeared in his mind of Eugene, sitting on an adult lion, galloping with a sword in his hands, and he thought what it would be like if he succeeded. Keeping her eyes on the kitten, she asked if the other guilds had mounts, to which the brother replied that they did, but they were all low level, and no one had a high-level monster like this. Eugene smiled contentedly. He turned to his brother and asked if he could try to race him, thinking that it could be huge, and if he succeeded, the baby could become the only high-level riding monster in the world. The guy began to think about magical beasts. A painted fiery lion stood in front of a man with a sword and shield. The guy thought that monsters that existed only in legends became reality after the appearance of dungeons. Huge snakes were pierced with spears. He added that most of them should be destroyed. The knight was sitting on a blue unicorn, holding a spear, and the guy finished his thought by saying that, however, there were cases when they could be tamed. Warriors on unicorns galloped after the fiery lion. Eugene told his brother that monsters were especially rare as mounts. People on griffins flew down. The guy added that they are especially needed in high-ranking dungeons because of their size, and the presence of a mount makes staying there much more favorable. The guy looked at his brother with enthusiasm, holding his hand in front of him, and said that, among other things, the lion cub has resistance to fire, so it's a pity to just refuse. He pointed to his brother, who was looking at him in confusion, and added that a lion would be ideal as his mount. Eugene asked him to think about what would happen if he found another mount. After which Eugene imagined how he was sitting on a chicken that was fried after using the technique, and said that his brother was right. In the fantasy, Eugene was sitting on a lion, and the guy was lying on a lot of money. Eugene continued to say that the lion has resistance to fire, and it is an unprecedented high-level monster, and if you tame it, you can get a power that is impossible to imagine, and Eugene himself will get insane many benefits as payments for taming. Looking at the angry lion cub, Eugene asked how he was going to tame it. The guy tilted his head with a smile. Suddenly he raised his hand with a ladle. He and his brother were wearing scarves and aprons, after which he said that they should start with food, because if you give him something tasty, you can earn extra points. There were broccoli and monster meat on the table. The guy also put a bowl for food and asked his brother what the baby was eating, to which Eugene replied that he was eating monster meat, to which magic stones needed to be mixed, adding that 1 stone was needed for 1 meal C-class. Eugene was very surprised by what he heard since 1 such stone cost 10 billion won. They poured fragments of broken crystals onto a bowl of blue meat. This is the elite food of a magical beast. The kitten started eating. The guy looked devastated, thinking that if the baby eats only once a day, then a year will be 3,600,000, and if 3 times a day, then 10 billion won. Eugene told him not to worry, and that he will pay for the food. The baby happily devoured the food in the bowl. Eugene thought that if you look at it like that, the kitten is quite cute. The guy's cheeks turned red as he wondered if the beast would understand the code words if he said that he loved him. In the guy's fantasy, he and the lion cub stood on the grass next to the bowl, and the guy wondered that if he generally understands the meaning of each word, take heart, then will there be an effect if he tells him every time during feeding that loves him. Eugene opened the glass door, deciding that he needed to first gain his interest. The animal looked at him irritably. The lion cub angrily jumped on the guy. Eugene waved his hand, deciding that getting closer through play after feeding would suit him. He swung the B-class belt, which the baby bit on. He recalled how he played with the dog and thought that while working part-time at a veterinary clinic, everyone was delighted with such a game of toffee. Suddenly, the animal shook its head, and the guy was spun around in the air, which made him scream to his brother. Eugene ran into the garden in fear while the guy was getting up and asked if he was okay, to which his brother replied that everything was okay, but something else was more important now. He took the owner's sign in his hand. Eugene brought it to the face of the irritated beast and calmly said that he was its owner. Suddenly, the baby calmed down. The guy sat in delight in front of the baby till notifications appeared, saying that the title of the ideal teacher adds an effect to the owner's sign and that the animal is showing interest in the teacher. The lion cub fell on its side and began to play affectionately with the guy. Eugene put his hand on his chest and mentally called him cutie, and Eugene said in surprise that it was the first time he had seen a baby behave like that. He leaned down and extended his hand while the guy held the animal by its paws, saying that he would hug it, and his brother told him to be careful because he was still a monster. Suddenly, the animal bit Eugene's hand, causing him to exclaim. Eugene took the baby in his arms while his brother grimly held his hand and told the little animal that this should not be done. Eugene exhaled and scratched the back of his head, saying that it's fine as long as he doesn't act aggressively towards Eugene, and added that his brother should raise him well because even if he doesn't become a mount, he will protect Eugene. The guy held the baby in his arms and with a wide smile said that he would put all his effort into raising him. The kid rubbed his head against the guy while he thought that raising animals was better than brainwashing people. He imagined himself playing with several baby magical beasts and wondered if he could keep several of the beasts he had raised near him. Then he imagined how these kids jumped into his arms and he was very happy, thinking that in this case he would become something like a tamer of magical animals. He stood up with a smile, holding the animal in his arms, and said that he would take it as they had agreed, after which his brother asked him if he would raise it outside of the garden. The guy headed to the door and said that the dorm room was also very spacious, to which Eugene asked in surprise if he really would leave and live separately. Eugene turned around with a smile, thinking that if he stayed, his brother would ban him again, after which he replied that it would be better, and he also had Myung-woo and Jaram. Eugene looked down in disappointment. Eugene asked in surprise what was wrong with him, to which his brother replied that they had just made up and he couldn't even really see him, adding that he understood that the guy should have his own life, but still, he didn't raise glance at brother. Eugene listened in surprise as the guy said that he thought they could live together like before. He remembered the words of Seong-hin, who said that the guy knows the value of family ties so well that even if his anxiety seems excessive, it should be treated with understanding. Hyojin put his hand on his brother's head, thinking that he was not to blame for anything. He patted his brother on the head and said that he was not moving around and that he would live here and there and would also come here often, after which he thought that in fact, his skill and the way the world had become were to blame. He happily patted his brother on the back and said with a smile that as soon as he finished training, they will relax together more often. Suddenly, it dawned on him and he asked Eugene if he was free tomorrow evening. The brother's answer rang through the kitchen, saying that he could free up some time, and then asked what it was for. The guy looked him in the face and offered to have a glass after tomorrow's practice, to which his brother asked in surprise if he wanted to drink. Eugene raised his hand and said that Eugene is already an adult and they haven't even drunk together yet. He imagined them sitting in a room with pizza on the table and thought that if there was peace all around, as before, then it would probably be normal for them to live together and drink in the evenings. Eugene happily lowered his gaze and said that he would wait. Eugene raised the animal and said that he still needed to come up with a name. His brother asked if he had any ideas. The guy lowered the baby lower and with a smile suggested calling him Peace, because there should be peace and love in the earthly world. Clouds floated across the sky while the guy reasoned that there was nothing wrong with this, because they were recently reunited brothers and they should often spend time with each other. Another gate appeared in the city. There was a crowd of people around it, a policeman was talking on the radio, and a cameraman was filming what was happening. Eugene stood in a stupor. Eugene smiled warmly. Manhwa stood behind Jaram. The girl confusedly asked what was going on. Suddenly she pointed to the hero's brother and exclaimed, asking why the head of the guild should go with them, to which the guy replied with a smile that he was looking forward to today. He turned his gaze to Eugene and asked him to take care of him. The guy looked up with a devastated look, thinking that there was definitely something wrong with his younger brother. Eugene and Jaram stood in front of the dungeon. The girl looked unhappy, and the guy looked to the side. The operator said that he would take pictures of them, asking them to look at him. The reporter approached the guy and asked why he was personally assisting in the first clearing of the Jaram hunter's dungeon. The girl looked nervously into the camera, and the guy calmly answered into the microphone that this was the first dungeon of the new S-class, and therefore he wanted to conduct it personally, and besides, it was his duty as the head of the guild and the most experienced S-class. Manhwa and Eugene were sitting on a bench behind them. The guy covered his face with his hand and asked if this is how peer works, after which Manhwa said that this story would become a touching example for others. Eugene had an image in his head of his brother, Jaram, Manhwa, and Seong Han using abilities, and he thought that this was an ideal alliance because they are two representatives of generally opposite elements, fire and ice. Plus, they have the creator of the equipment, Manhwa, and then thought, will he get Seong Han's defensive ability? Eugene looked at the guy with a smile and said that he was looking forward to it. Various types of blades glittered on the stand. The surprise guy stood among a large amount of equipment. The man behind them said that all this was given out for free, but everything must be returned after returning. Manhwa and Eugene looked at the weapons. The hero said that due to the influence of the guild, there were indeed a lot of good things there. Suddenly Manhwa was frightened by a man who appeared next to him, who said that any damage would need to be repaired. The hero looked at his comrade and thought with displeasure that this was a man who would create things 10 times better. He handed the spear to the guy and told him not to be so afraid, because high-level things are stronger than ordinary ones. They looked at the jars illuminated by the sun, and the guy said that they should grab some restorative potions, after which they asked if they were free. Jaram was collecting potions. The man replied to Eugene that since they were not in the guild, they needed to be paid. The guy didn't listen to him and shouted to the girl to grab potions for 4 and give them to them. The girl picked up a huge axe with eyes and asked her to choose a weapon, asking if Eugene liked it, to which the guy confusedly asked where she found this thing. Eugene, standing in front of the reporters, looked at his brother, who explained to the girl that she focuses on skills, so she should take something to suit her physique. The journalist brought him a microphone and asked if he had any idea about the prospects for the further development of the guild. But the guy did not listen to him, thinking that his brother, as he thought, was surprisingly erudite for a novice hunter. He decided that this knowledge was accurate. He suddenly smiled warmly, ending the thought with his brother gathering as much information as possible about the hunters out of concern for him, and the reporter exclaimed that the head of Abyss smiled. The reporter quickly left, deciding that the prospects were really good. And the head and heroes gathered at the dungeon. Eugene offered to move forward, to which his brother agreed, and Jaram quipped that they were inseparable. The dungeon gate was floating in the air. Eugene said that on the other side was a relatively safety-ranked dungeon, a rocky area, and that the gate would close an hour after they entered, and would not open until either the boss or hunters. The guy took out the capsule and said that in a pinch, you can use the gate stone, but it is such a rare thing that you can't even find 2 of them in the country. The girl was amazed that he even had such a thing. Looking at his brother standing with a spear, he told them to try their best. He called out to Eugene, but he did not hear. Images of the past appeared in his thoughts, and he thought that just a couple of days ago he was treated like trash and humiliated in the dungeons. He looked at his group. Jaram was calling him, and thought that now everything is different. He is not at the bottom of the dead hole, he is not being persecuted. He adjusted his equipment, adding that he was going with his younger brother and people who were glad to see him. With a wide smile, he replied that he was already following them. He walked towards the group, deciding that that future no longer existed, and as if it had never existed. Entering the gate, he thought that he believed in it then. Myung-woo and Jaram looked around in surprise. The girl exclaimed in admiration. They stood on a small hill. Around them there were green fields and high rocks. The girl exclaimed that this was a dungeon. Yu Hyan drew his blade. Stepping forward a little, the girl looked around and said that this is the first time she sees such a landscape, as if it were another world, to which the guy replied that they did not come to have fun, and so that they should not succumb to the camp mood. The guy looked sternly at the sword, which was enveloped in dark flames. He struck the ground, and a wave of flames hit in front of him. The heroes looked at what was happening in shock. Jaram looked at the guy's face in a stupor. The next second, she walked to the edge of the cliff, looking at the burning fields, grabbed her head, and exclaimed that he was doing this. She turned to Yu-Yun and shouted at him in irritation, asking what he was trying to achieve by setting everything on fire for no reason. Eugene approached her from behind. She continued to shout, asking if he had heard anything about protecting the environment. After which she said that if he didn't like something, he could just say it, but she was interrupted by Eugene, saying that everything was completely wrong and for her to look down. She looked down and was surprised to notice that there were monsters hiding there. Yu-Yun, standing against the backdrop of a burning flame, sheathed his blade and said that the first thing after getting into the dungeon is to ensure safety, but from the outside, it is impossible to assess the situation and find out if there are monsters, and therefore the strongest hunter of the GR. He looked sternly at the heroes and asked if they were taught these basics in theoretical classes. The girl, standing behind Eugene, awkwardly scratched the back of her head and said that, of course, they were taught everything, adding that she simply did not have an area attack, because if she had, then the girl would have done everything. She was interrupted by Eugene and said that she is right. The head, standing with his back to them, exhaled heavily and listened as the girl asked whether skills could really appear. Eugene asked if she listened to the lectures. He looked at the dead monster and explained that the level increases after killing monsters, and every 10 levels a new skill appears. He opened the interface and added with a smile that this is exactly why they came to practice, but it was impossible to predict which skill would appear. He looked up at the girl, who was looking at him with interest, and thought that, fortunately, he himself could choose him. The notification window said that the guy could select a preferred skill for the Jaram object. He remembered the pale rain that Jaram used in his previous life, and thought that this was just a characteristic area attack skill for an ice, which a notification appeared in front of the girl looking at the guy, saying that the Jaram object was set to receive this skill. The girl listened with delight, as he said that he was sure that she would have an area attack, after which she happily said that if she raised 10 levels, she would be able to help Eugene. Yu-Yun languidly said that he did not need help. He turned to her and explained that the amount of experience for raising 1 level for an S class is 5 times higher than for an F class, and besides, for each subsequent level, more points are required, so even if they cleared the entire dungeon, they still won't get 10 levels. Suddenly he put out his hand, pointing at the girl, and said that he would help his brother and that she should take care of herself. Eugene stood behind the angry girl and asked his brother to be careful. Jaram said that he has been very cocky lately. The girl approached Yu-Yun and, pointing her finger at him, began to quarrel with him. Eugene, standing behind them, tried to calm them down. The girl asked if he was annoyed because she was close to his brother, and then said that he was her guardian. The guy calmly told her that he wasn't bullying anyone. He was just trying to instill in her S-rank self-awareness. Jaram said irritably that she herself was aware of this. Eugene tried to calm them down, telling them to listen to him, but his brother interrupted him, telling the girl that she was talk. Eugene grabbed both of them by the cheeks in a rage. They still continued to argue. The girl asked why he even followed him here. Yu-Yun replied that it was not out of great pleasure that he kept his distance all this time. Unable to bear it, the guy shouted at them to stop, asking what they had done. They pointed at each other, trying to shift the blame from themselves, which made the guy even more angry. Myung-woo timidly stood aside and listened as the guy shouted at them that if they were going to fight because of him in front of him, then they should leave now. After which Myung-woo fearfully asked if they would leave. Eugene looked at his brother and asked why he came here with them, to which he replied that he came to help with the practice. Then the guy turned his gaze to the girl and asked her why she came to the dungeon. She awkwardly replied that she came to raise the level and hunt monsters. He then looked at them angrily, raising his hand, and told them to focus on killing monsters furiously, adding that the F classes also needed to kill a large number of monsters in order to increase their levels. Jaram and Eugene listened silently as he told them to pretend they were getting along, just like in an interview, but if they kept fighting like that, he wouldn't even look at them. They looked at each other angrily and decided that there was nothing to do. The girl tensely extended her hand, asking if they would be friends from now on. Eugene looked at her irritably and said that he would also speak informally, after which he asked her to take care of him. They quickly and angrily shook each other's hands with great force. The guy looked at this and said that now they should try to really get along with each other. A monster appeared not far from them, taking off while the guy said that they were in a dungeon and should not let their guard down, after which he asked to help him and Myungwoo raised 10 levels. Jaram and Eugene quickly looked at the fleeing monster. They decisively took off, leaving behind an explosion, and continued to argue in the air about who exactly would bring the monster to Eugene. The hero and Myungwoo watched in shock as they created explosions after blows with enormous power. And the guy thought that an ideal alliance would only be when they learned to get along with each other. Then he wondered whether such a future would come. Voices were heard in the Shining Ice Palace. Naked said that someone had entered the dungeon, to which the second voice asked who exactly. Stairs rose next to the ice buildings, and the first person said that this was the one who turned back time. A girl with blue hair approached the chair and loudly asked if it was true, after which she asked to find where exactly he entered. The girl in the chair fussily asked her for some time. The blue-haired girl with a smile asked her to hurry up because they can only intervene when he's in the dungeon. She looked at the screen where Eugene was and said that they were waiting for his return, calling him dear. A huge stone arch stood next to a rock. Some animals were grazing under it. Something caught the monster's attention. He looked at the sky. Suddenly Jaram struck their herd, freezing the area. She looked at what had happened with a smile and, letting off steam from her mouth, said that it was easy. She turned to the flying monsters and said that she would freeze them and bring them to the guy. Suddenly a thread of energy knitted together while the girl was wondering whether a spear would pierce such an ice sheet. Eugene snapped his fingers and the monsters burst into flames. He said that he would burn their fur so that the spear would penetrate better. One by one, the monsters fell into a heap in front of the guys. The rival said that they were still breathing, so it would be enough to just pierce them with a spear. Myungwoo looked at it in shock, while Eugene fussed behind him and said that they were incredible. He asked Eugene, who was holding a magic stone, what he was doing, to which the guy replied that it was necessary to collect stones from dead monsters and was horrified at how much it all cost, and the S ranks were freaking out. The guy, standing on the corpse of the monster, extended his hand to Myungwoo and said that he also needed to raise the level. Myungwoo looked down timidly, sticking his spear, and he asked the hero if he would have good skills if he diligently leveled up. Eugene looked at him as he opened the interface and said that he had nothing to worry about because this would happen. He looked at the information about the guy and thought that at level 10, he would unlock the SS class crafting skill, Master of the Gold Forge. Suddenly, he noticed that this skill had one more condition. In the skill window it said that to obtain it, you need to reach level 10, and it was written with an error that you also need to sharpen 10,000 blades. The guy looked at the inscription in surprise. He looked towards the joyful Mayan, who had raised another level, and thought that this had just happened. He continued to cut monsters in shock and asked himself whether there were errors in the system and whether it was really filled in by hand. Myungwoo wiped the sweat from his forehead and, looking at the interface, said that he had reached level 10, but not a single skill was given. The guy silently walked up to him and patted him on the back, asking himself who was filling the system. An amazing rocky landscape opened up before him, and he remembered that in the future, nothing was known about the system either. It changed the world. So many thought that it was a miracle given by God, after which he asked himself if it were God, would there be typos? Jaram hovered above Eugene and said that she thought this was the last section. The guy below asked how Myungwoo and Eugene were doing and how many levels they had raised. The guy replied to his brother that Myungwoo had already raised 10 levels and he himself was almost finished. Suddenly his attention was attracted by a notice that said that he had been found. He looked closely at the inscription, wondering what it meant. Myungwoo asked if he was okay. Another notification appeared in front of his face, on which someone was apologizing. Looking at him, the guy said that there was something in the system window. He looked at it in surprise, ending the sentence by saying that he was apologizing for something. Suddenly his brother called out to him, causing him to quickly turn around. Looking to the side, he saw worried Jaram and Eugene flying towards him. The guy covered his brother, and the girl covered them with her spear from the flames heading towards him. Eugene sat on the ground next to his brother and worriedly asked if everything was okay with him. The guy looked at what was happening in shock and asked what it was, to which Jaram replied that it was an attack from the boss. The fields all around were blazing in scarlet flames, the guy exclaimed, asking what the boss meant, because the boss of a low-ranking dungeon cannot attack in such a radius. The bull with red eyes and curved horns looked ahead, and he was told that initially the boss should have been another huge mountain bull. This bull was pierced by the beak of a huge bird, and the girl added that suddenly that bird appeared and killed him. The heroes looked up, after which Jaram asked in shock what they would do, and wasn't the gate supposed to open after killing the monster? Eugene told her that even though he died, the gate does not appear, and that means that bird took his place as the boss. Looking at the bird making a strong screech, the guy thought that they needed to defeat this boss in order to get out. Eugene took out a capsule with a return stone and, looking at the bird, said that it was the first time he had seen such a monster and did not know how dangerous it was, and, handing the capsule to his brother, told him to take it and, if something happened, at least he could get out. Eugene nervously looked at his brother's hand. He called out to him, but the guy did not answer. Memories from the past when he lost his brother appeared in his head, and he wondered if this time it would be the same, wondering if the powerful boss appeared because of failure to take measures in time. Then he remembered how his brother in the past, bleeding, also handed him a capsule, and the guy wondered if the younger brother would really go alone, just like then. He put his hand on his brother's while he told him to quickly take the capsule and leave. Holding his hand, he calmly said that he didn't need it. Eugene's eyes shone as he looked at the monster, and he said that the bird is weaker than Eugene. The boss was circling above the ground, dropping fiery attacks. The guy said that it was a second-class monster, a golden-billed Mayan, and that it had a fire attribute, and the monster itself was the same level as the bosses of high-level or ranked dungeons. Then the guy added that the bird's main weapon is its beak, and its weak point is the fragile skull bones compared to the rest of its body, and that the bird has a pair of spare wings, so Eugene should go straight to the head. Sitting on the ground, the leader asked his brother how he knew this, to which he asked if it was suspicious. The guy wiped the sweat from his chin and said that they could talk after they got out. Looking at the bird approaching them, he thought that this time they would all get out, because now everything was different from his past, adding that he would not allow the same thing to happen again this time. Eugene sat on the ground behind his brother, who looked confidently ahead. He turned to Jaram and asked her to create a curtain with her breath. The girl stretched her arms forward and used icy breath, and aura began to accumulate in her hands. She raised her hand above her head, after which a large snowflake appeared above the heroes. Then the guy turned to his brother, who was holding the sword, and said that the bird remained with him. Eugene turned to the girl and asked her to take care of her brother. She looked him in the eyes confidently and told him not to worry. The guy again took out the capsule with the stone and put it in his brother's hand, saying that he could not trust it. He then drew his sword and rushed towards the monster across the burning field, Eugene shouting after him to aim for the head. The girl, holding the barrier, asked if he was sure of his choice because she has the skill of flying, to which the guy replied that she would have burned alive, because you can only resist the monster's flame with the same resistance to fire that his brother has. They watched as Eugene blocked the bird's flames with his blade, and the guy added that although he did not have the skill of flying, he did, however, have something similar. The bird looked at the guy. Then she walked towards him with a squeal. The guy dodged the monster's powerful blow at the last moment. He looked at the bird while his brother shouted to him that the monster had opened. The guy turned to the bird, resting his foot on the ground. He raised his sword back with a stern expression on his face. The next moment, he struck the monster with an incredibly strong blow, cutting off its wing. Myungwoo admired the fact that the guy was able to cut off a wing with just one blow, and Eugene asked in shock why he was aiming for the wings. The bird flapped its wings, and the guy added that it had extra wings, and it was pointless. The bird rose into the air with explosive force. The guy looked at it in surprise. Opening her mouth, she launched a flame into him. The guy covered his face with his hands from the flame. Eugene looked at this in surprise and thought why his brother was not doing anything, but just standing on the ground, because he would have finished off the monster at once if he had gone up and hit him in the head. He remembered how his brother used the willow leaf skill in the past and thought that although he did not have the flying skill, he could use them, and then wondered if it might be that he had not yet obtained this skill. The bird in the air looked back. Suddenly she walked behind the guy straight towards Eugene and the others. Eugene turned to his brother in fear. Jaram held the barrier in horror, asking the guy what they should do. The monster opened its mouth and began to accumulate energy. The girl shouted that it was rushing towards them. The heroes were very scared. MANHWA grabbed the guy by the neck in horror. The girl with tears in her eyes asked if she could stop the monster. With her icy breath, MANHWA whined and called the guy by name. Eugene coughed and asked to let him go. Eugene gritted his teeth as blue leaves began to appear in front of him. He activated the blue willow leaves. The technique enveloped the bird, causing it to stop and squeal. The guys looked at this in surprise. Eugene exclaimed joyfully that his brother could really use this technique. Looking at his brother, he said that now Eugene will. Without finishing the sentence, he noticed that his brother was standing with his hands raised. Eugene looked in shock as his brother waved his hands, standing under the bird, which was enveloped in willow leaves. The guy mentally asked what he was doing there. Suddenly Eugene's attention was attracted by Eugene, who shouted to him that the technique was being used incorrectly and to advance. The guy put his hands to his face and shouted with all his might for his brother to step on the leaves and run along them. Eugene was surprised by what he heard. He stepped on willow leaves. A second later, he looked in surprise at how his feet were standing on the floating leaves. Without taking his eyes off it, he said that now he could win. He pushed off sharply with his foot. A moment later, the guy was already running through the leaves above the bird's head. The monster opened its mouth, in which a sphere of energy appeared. A stream of fire shot out from the beak and headed towards Eugene. The guy swung his sword and exclaimed that flames were just nonsense to him. He made a direct strike, and a column of dark flame hit the monster in the back, pinning him to the ground. The guy swung his blade again. The next blow hit the monster's head. Eugene was thrown away from the bird by the explosion. A huge amount of stones scattered to the sides. The girl covered herself with her hands, continuing to hold the curtain, on which fragments were falling. Eugene shouted to her not to lower the protection, otherwise they would all die. The dust around the monster's corpse whirled and began to dissipate, the bird's body sticking out of the ground. Eugene lifted his foot from the willow leaves. The guy went down to the ground. All his clothes were covered in blood. He turned to his brother, who called him by name. He watched as Eugene ran up to him, asking with a smile if he was okay and if he was hurt. He grabbed his brother by the shoulders in delight as he smiled and said that it was all thanks to him, and said with admiration that his idea was simply incredible. After which he asked how he came up with the idea of using willow leaves instead of the flying skill. The guys just beamed with joy. Eugene replied that he thought Eugene had always used them that way. The guy replied that he didn't even suspect such a use. Jaram and MANHWA stood aside. The girl awkwardly scratched the back of her head, while Eugene said that he always regretted that he did not have the skill of flying, but his brother solved his problem. To which the guy replied that it was nothing special. The girl thought that since he killed the Eugene listened with a smile as his brother said that this was not a small thing, because it was like he had gained a new skill, and at that time he thought that since this made his brother so happy, then so be it, and that it was as if he had received a Christmas present in Children's Day at the same. His brother looked into his eyes with delight and said that it all happened thanks to him, adding that he was the best. The dungeon gates opened. The guy awkwardly said that when they leave, he will look at the rest of his skills. The brother thanked him, and Jaram asked him to look at her skills. The people standing at the dungeon were fussily asking if everything was okay with the head. Jaram and Eugene were surrounded by reporters who said that they were worried about them because the level of the dungeon had changed dramatically. The guy said that they suddenly had a rank boss. A man from the crowd said that it was a great relief that Jaram was okay. Eugene began to move away from the crowd and, pretending that they were strangers, listened to his brother say that this should be reported to the association, while thinking that it was better to keep a distance outside. Seonghin ran towards him very quickly, while the guy was thinking that he needed to quickly hand over his equipment and leave. The man shouted his name with all his might. He fell at the feet of the frightened guy, who had raised his leg, and began to ask if he was hurt, saying that he should have come with them. Eugene awkwardly said that he was fine, thinking that the mission of not being conspicuous had failed. Mangwu watched as the man rose to his feet, standing in front of the embarrassed guy, and told him to climb on his back because he needed to get back quickly, to which he awkwardly replied that he was fine. Mangwu looked down in disappointment. The skyscraper stood under the night sky. The guy turned to his brother, saying that he had arrived. The guy put the food on the table, saying that he had brought snacks from the administration and that they looked wildly expensive. Holding the bag by the handles, he looked back when he heard the sound of water and asked himself if Eugene was washing himself, adding that he had recently gotten a lot of the boss's blood on him. The guy opened the door to the garden, deciding that while he would wait, he entered the garden with his arms wide apart. The animal ran towards him, and he finished his sentence with a smile, saying that at this time he could play with peace. The guy asked if he was okay, but the kid interrupted him by kicking him in the stomach with great force. The lion cub again spun the guy around, and Eugene, spinning in the air, said that he loved him. He lay down next to the baby, who was eating food, and again said with a smile that he loved him. Eugene lay down in the middle of the garden. All his clothes were torn off. Peace lay on his chest, and the guy wondered if the imposed effect of education would be enough, adding that he was dying of fatigue. He looked at the ceiling with a smile, saying that today he really thought he was going to die. He recalled strange notifications from the system, reasoning that there were too many strange things today, typos, and the fact that it seemed to be talking to him. He then remembered the boss fight, continuing to reason that there were a lot of strange things in the dungeon too, because a high-level monster appeared out of nowhere, and this only happened occasionally in the future. The guy got up and sat on the floor. The lion cub rolled off his chest. He turned pale with fright, wondering if this was all because he had turned back time. The animal, lying on its back, began to swear. The guy apologized to him, thinking that something had broken due to the time rollback. There was an emptiness in his head. He only thought that because of him, the phenomena that appeared in the future began to appear now, adding that if the system personally spoke to him because of this, he timidly wanted something to say, but stopped. The next second, he raised his hand up and shouted that this was not his problem, because the system should have explained everything clearly from the very beginning, adding that it was very unfriendly. He clicked on the skills icon, saying that with skills everything is the same. Although everything is written in detail, it is not clear what the code word is. Suddenly a holographic book opened in front of him, throwing him away. He looked at it in shock, asking what was wrong with the system window. The unknown girl ran her fingers over the interface, asking if the connection was stable. In front of the system window stood a girl, next to whom were two beastmen. The girl said that their contacts were very limited in time, and that they forcibly opened the channel. The centaur next to her said that they should have explained everything more clearly. The girl added that there is no time, but the guy, however, must figure it out, because they tried to make it as intuitive as possible, and then gave it a form that is familiar to his world. On one of the pages of the book, there were photographs of Jaram and Eugene. Above them, there was an inscription that these were objects with the education effect completed. The guy was sitting on his knees, looking at the book, and asked if it was a magazine. He raised his hand and asked what was going on in the head of the creator of the system. He read the writing on the page out loud, asking if only S grades counted, then answered his own question by saying that judging by the fact that Myungwoo and Seong Han weren't, it was. He noticed that on the page there was the number 50 and a hen with her chicks wishing him good luck, asking if there were only 50 windows and what that good luck wish meant. Suddenly his brother entered the garden, wiping his head, apologized, and said that it took him a long time to wash himself. He looked at Eugene, sitting on the ground next to the system interface and the magazine, and asked if everything was okay with him because he was kind of pale. The guy wondered if the system wanted him to tame as many as 50 S rank hunters. The furry monster sitting in the cage bared its teeth, looking at its prey with glowing red eyes. When the grate opened, he ran forward towards Peace, swinging his long claws. A loud impact sound was heard. Drops of dark blood began to fly in different directions. The camera filmed a breeding lion, which sat next to the defeated monster and licked blood from its paw. The voice over noted that this is a subspecies of unicorns, flamehorn lion, class 2. Day 2 of training the skill of taming animals. Eugene looked at the beast through his protective helmet and said that its current indicators are 51 centimeters in length and 5-6 kilograms in weight. He added that in the past 2 days, it had doubled in size. The guy behind whom the camera stood lifted the bars and noted with a smile on his face that the beast was a beast. He spread his arms with a satisfied face when Peace began to jump in his direction and said that he had done a good job. At that moment, the fiery lion hit his teacher in the stomach with his front paws, causing him to start coughing loudly, flying back. The guy smiled weakly as a bead of sweat ran down his face. Taking the beast wagging its tail in his arms, Eugene raised his fist up and loudly declared that this was a mere trifle, since he had rented all possible equipment to increase endurance and strength, after using which his indicators increased by 94 and 45 units. Last night, the man poured a light liquid into a glass with ice, asking about the animal tamer. The two brothers were sitting on the floor near the glass table, and Eugene raised his glass. He said that he got this skill after he reached level 10. Yuyela asked him what he was doing. The elder brother opened his mouth slightly and began to bring the glass to him, simultaneously telling him that this was a skill that allowed him to influence animals. He added that it was an S-class skill, so it could be used on high-level monsters. At this moment, he thought that it was better to H. The younger brother was very surprised when he heard about the S-class. He rose to his feet with his eerie eyes burning and wrapped a rope around his hands, causing Eugene to stumble back. Eugene began to reason that an S-class skill and an F-class body in such a dangerous world. Moreover, it is also a unique skill. His brother indignantly asked if he was really thinking of. The guy with a displeased face arched his index finger and began to exclaim that instead of hiding it, they should find a use for it. While Peace tried to steal a snack from the table with his paw, his teacher said that he could race him into a mount for his brother and could race him to have the. A picture appeared in his head of hunters sitting astride various animals. Eugene asked how many more S-class hunters need high-level mounts. He asked his brother to imagine how everything would change if the Abyss acquired them and could explore the huge dungeons on horseback. The guild leader froze, pursing his lips as Eugene noted that thanks to this skill, the course of clearing dungeons would greatly change. The guy thought that, fortunately, Peace was already under the effect. He threw the cub a small toy in the shape of a mouse, which he successfully caught with his teeth. He thought that if the system wanted him to educate 5 OS classes, the teacher put protective pads on his hands, which the fiery lion hit with all his might. They also ran at sunset, tying a large tire to the body of the beast. The guy thought that it would be better for him to train monsters and brainwash people. He buried his face in the floor of the training room while Peace sat on his back and moaned about how bad he felt. The fiery lion with a good-natured face looked at the teacher when he asked if he was tired. Eugene, with empty eyes, lay in a puddle of his own and said that he did not think that he would have to work so hard for this venture. He recalled how a bunch of monsters flew over the city, thinking that the more hunter riders appeared, the more effective the cleansing would be, which means there will be fewer dungeon breaks and Peace will be safer. He thought that, especially considering that over the years there will be more dungeons. The guy abruptly turned over on his back and took Peace with his hands, closing his eyes. He exclaimed that his conscience did not allow him to simply relax and rest. He looked up in surprise when a voice from the side said that this was simply incredible. Simayong entered the room with a smile on his face and clapped his hands, saying that Eugene's practice had barely ended and he was already training here. Looking at the man, the guy rose to his knees, saying that Yu Yeon allowed him to use this premises. Simeon replied that he did not come here to kick him out. He looked at the fiery lion with a soft smile, noting that he had grown a lot in just a day of training. Peace, with one ear raised, sat calmly on the floor, hugging himself with his tail. Eugene, with a frightened face, jerked sharply as the man bowed in front of him and said that he was delighted and inspired. The guy was embarrassed by this action and indignantly asked what came over him. Without raising his head, Simeon began to apologize for all the times he was rude to him and underestimated him. He noted that he had demonstrated soothsaying and analytical ability as well as his new skill. When he grabbed the guy with his arms while on his knees, he with an indignant face began to push away Simeon, who asked him to join the Abyss and become the new wind-in world of hunters. Peace recalled how he flicked the teacher in different directions, seeing how he was now doing the same to the man. Eugene shouted that he didn't want to, and that he didn't have the ability to do it. The man continued to ask, saying that they needed his strength. Turning blue, the guy clenched his teeth in anger, thinking that he was not at all insightful, but simply knew all the answers from the future. He remembered the unpleasant meeting with Simeon and thought that this person was unpleasant to him, and every time he went to the Abyss, he became angry and upset because of his poisonous remarks. The man waved his hand, asking him to think again. Sitting on his knees and looking at the puzzled guy, he said that they would provide him with transportation for the monster cubs, food, and the necessary equipment. He added that they would do anything at his request. Eugene froze as a bead of cold sweat ran down his cheek. He presented an Egyptian fresco depicting him as a ruler, with Simeon as his servant. He suddenly remembered that these events did not happen in this life, and the man simply does not know all the horror that he had to endure. Because of him, he realized that he was now in charge. The guy grimaced sharply and muttered that he didn't need to. Humming the song, Eugene spread his arms to the sides with a satisfied face and said that his brother would still cover all the expenses. Looking at the training room, he added that since he was using them as a dormitory, then in general, he could sign a contract. The man immediately became inspired and waved his hand until a blue holographic window appeared. He said that if so, then it was worth doing right now. Eugene squatted down with a grin and patted P's head, saying that he had the condition that he should be a regular employee since he was going to be an independent hunter. He lifted the cub up and began to circle, noting that this way he could freely raise animals for other guilds and make a lot of money. When Simeon began to say that this was for the sake of the future of the abyss, he said that it did not concern him. The man's eyes widened in surprise when the guy said that the abyss, in any case, is the strongest guild in the country, so they simply would not easily fulfill this exclusive contract. While the beast was washing itself in his arms, Eugene looked away and began scratching his ear, saying that even he had an idea of how important the skill of taming magical beasts was, because thanks to it, clearing dungeons would become much more effective. He introduced the golden egg, saying that to high-ranking hunters, he was like a goose laying golden eggs. He asked how other guilds would react to this if the abyss wanted to take this skill into its own hands. He imagined a goose in a nest surrounded by many people with knives. The guy said that many are ready to use force if they cannot get something, and some are even poisoned by putting poison in their food. He noted that since he is F-class, he definitely won't die from this. Imagining a picture of how people would sit in front of the goose and she would give them golden eggs, he asked whether it would be better for him to be an independent hunter. Hugging the yawning piece, Eugene stuck out his index finger and said, with a smile, that he could raise one beast per guild in exchange for immunity and money. Looking at Simeon, he showed a thumbs up and noted that, of course, he would raise a fiery lion for them, so he asked to hire him and negotiate with other guilds for him. The man opened his mouth slightly when the guy continued to babble about salaries, bonuses, and social security. Touching his chin with his hands, he laughed, noting that, apparently, he could not cope with it, so he accepted the conditions. He pointed to the camera mounted on a tripod and asked if he could take the video from the training for negotiations. Eugene agreed. Simeon touched the camera and added that there was something else. Holding peace in his hands, the guy looked at the man. He began to ask if he would sign the hunter's contract in the event that Abyss became the strongest shields in the country. The guy lowered his head and replied that he didn't even know. He pointed to the man with glasses and asked if he was just trying to film this. He looked away, noting that he had been caught. Simeon turned around on the way out, hearing the question of what use would it be to them to hire him. Eugene, with peace on his shoulder, laughed sweetly and said that with his skill he was going to help them anyway. As he had nothing else, he said that if in the future he signs a contract and the man regrets it, it will not be his fault. He, in turn, went out into the corridor and laughed loudly, saying that he was amazed. Simeon walked along the bright corridor with the camera in his hands, asking how is it that there is nothing else. He watched the video with interest, saying that apparently Hunter Eugene had problems with self-esteem. He thought that he continued to surprise him every time he met. At this time, the guy in the training room with a joyful face was rolling on the floor, holding peace in his hands and joyfully exclaiming that now he will have a salary and social benefits. He asked the cub if he saw Simeon stutter out of confusion. Remembering their long-ago meeting in his office, the man thought about that those with unique abilities imagine themselves to be someone unknown, and power intoxicates them and makes them arrogant. He thought that Eugene also seemed eccentric to him, but he is different from them, since he soberly assesses the prospects and managed to lead to negotiations that were beneficial to him. Imagining images of the two Han brothers in his head, he wondered if the guy had always been so gifted, but he did not notice it because of the genius of his younger brother. Simeon touched his glasses with his hands, saying that just imagining Yuan, Jaram, and Shang Han fighting in his head, he thought that he assumed that other guilds would begin to put pressure on Abyss, but she was willing to take such a risk. Then an image of Eugene appeared in his head, dressed in an expensive suit with gold accents, with an adult fiery Leo walking next to him. He thought that if the guy remained an independent hunter, then all attention would be focused on him, and not on the Abyss. He realized that this was both a great benefit and a great risk. The man lowered his head, asking if he didn't realize their weight, because he was far from the world of hunters raising his head. He straightened his glasses with his hand and asked if it could be that he was doing this to protect his younger brother. While Eugene was playing with peace on his knees in the training hall, Simeon mentally noted that from now on the trophies of the largest guilds around the world would be focused on him. A man with dark hair sat on his desk and watched a video of a fiery lion on the screen. The girl in the fuchsia suit did the same. On the large, bright terrace, there was a chaise lounge on which a man was lying with a tablet in his hands. Touching his face with his fingers, he smiled, noting that he needed to go to the abyss as soon as he cleared his schedule. The video showed Eugene sitting and petting a contented piece while holding him in his arms. Simeon thought that he would soon find out what a valuable figure he really was. With his hands folded on his belt, the guy stood opposite the large play complex and told Peace that his corner was now completely ready. He squatted down, letting the cub sniff the new territory, after which he asked if he liked it. He said that now they can live together in a dormitory. He said that it would most likely be crowded here when he grew up, and in that case. The guy smiled nervously when Vuk and Jaram entered the room, and the girl with enthusiastic eyes pounced on his back. She asked loudly, "Who is it?" The guy with long hair asked in fear why there was a monster here. Eugene opened the door to the room amidst caustic screams. He heard the girl exclaim that this cat was very cute. After which his older brother explained that it was not a cat at all. Myungwoo then screamed that the monster was biting him and asked to be saved, to which Eugene explained to Peace that he turned to his brother, holding the angry beast in his arms, while the girl with a joyful face tried to pet him, and the bitten guy with long hair sat on the floor. The teacher said hello and asked what happened. Eugene asked him to step away with him for a minute. The elder brother looked at his family member with worried eyes and said that he would come over now. While expensive cars were cutting through the city streets, the guy shouted loudly, asking if the guild heads were really coming here to meet him. The two brothers walked out into a large, bright corridor. Eugene said that he could very well refuse and not see them. Eugene replied that he couldn't do that. He walked ahead with Peace in his arms, and the head of the abyss walked behind him, saying that these are S-class hunters, and hunters who are a lower class usually find it difficult to deal with them. The elder brother agreed with his words. With a grim face, he grabbed him sharply by the shoulder as the guy muttered that he would just tell them to go back. Eugene asked indignantly, how could he continue to behave like this towards the guild heads? As people in suits walked along the corridors, he asked how the fact that the leaders of the three guilds personally came to the abyss would affect public opinion. He himself answered, saying that everyone would be surprised and realize that the guild has influence, after which they themselves would. The teacher stepped forward, holding the fiery lion on his shoulder and sticking his thumb up. He said he needed to show himself at least once. Eugene began to say that, but however, Eugene interrupted and said that from now on, he was forbidden to say that word. Opening the door, he began to enter the room, saying that since they were going to negotiate, personally evaluate everything,